A gunshot echoed through the winter night, jolting Abigail Rose Calloway from her fitful sleep. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sat bolt upright, the patchwork quilt falling to her waist. The darkness pressed against the window panes like a living thing hungry to get in. For a moment, she sat frozen, listening to the howl of the wind, wondering if the sound had been real or merely another phantom from her dreams. Then came a second sound, not a gunshot, but a pounding at her door. Urgent, desperate. Abigail's hand moved with practiced certainty to the rifle beneath her bed. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, the familiar weight both a comfort and a burden. 10 years alone had taught her caution. 10 years of whispers and sideways glances whenever she ventured into Sugar Creek had taught her distrust. The pounding came again, more insistent this time. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady, despite the fear that coiled in her stomach like a rattlesnake. No answer came, but the moan of the wind, and another round of knocking. Abigail rose, slipping her feet into worn boots beside her bed. The cabin floor creaked beneath her weight as she moved through the darkness, rifle held ready. A small fire still smoldered in the hearth, casting just enough light to navigate by. She paused at the door, one hand on the latch, the other gripping her rifle. "I'm armed," she warned. "State your business." A man's voice, deep and calm, despite its urgency, replied, "We need shelter. My father is ill. The storm—" The rest was swallowed by a gust of wind that rattled the windows. Abigail hesitated. In 10 years, few had ventured this far into the valley, especially during winter. Her cabin stood at the end of a long, difficult trail, the last outpost before the wilderness claimed the land entirely. It was why she'd chosen to remain here after everything. The isolation suited her. Or so she told herself on the long, quiet nights. Decision made, she lifted the bar and opened the door, a crack rifle barrel visible. Snow swirled in along with the bitter Wyoming cold of February 1887. Standing on her porch were 2 men. The first, tall and broad-shouldered, stood directly before her. His dark eyes met hers without flinching, without the usual flicker of judgment or fear that Abigail had grown accustomed to seeing. His skin was copper in the dim light from her cabin, his long black hair dusted with snow. A deep scar ran from his temple to his jaw, visible even in the poor light. He wore buckskins and a heavy coat, but seemed unbothered by the cold. "He needs warmth," the younger man said simply. Not begging, not demanding, just stating a truth. Abigail's mind raced. She knew what they were, what the townspeople would call them. Savages, Indians, the enemy. She could hear the warnings of Reverend Walsh echoing in her ears. Those heathens would sooner scalp a Christian woman than look at her. The people of Sugar Creek had a particular hatred for the native tribes, especially after the skirmishes of the past decade. But something else rose in her memory too, her father's voice warm and certain. "The measure of our humanity, Abby, is how we treat those in need." The old man coughed again, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of death hovering close. More blood spattered the pristine white at his feet. Abigail made her choice. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," she said, not lowering her rifle completely. "But know this, I sleep lightly and shoot straight." The younger man nodded once, a gesture of understanding, perhaps respect. He helped the elder inside, supporting most of his weight. As they passed, Abigail caught the scent of wood smoke, pine, and something medicinal she couldn't identify. Once they were inside, she closed the door against the storm, sliding the heavy wooden bar back into place. The wind continued to howl, but it felt more distant, now a problem for tomorrow. "By the fire," she directed, gesturing to the hearth with her rifle. "I'll build it up." The younger man helped his father to the rocking chair beside the fireplace. Her father's chair, a fact that caused a momentary pang in Abigail's chest. She busied herself adding logs to the dying embers, using the iron poker to stir them to life. Sparks spiraled upward, and fresh flames licked at the new wood. In the growing light, she got her first proper look at her unexpected guests. The elder man's face was deeply lined, his skin like well-worn leather. His white hair hung in two long braids over his shoulders. His breathing was labored, and a sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cold. He wore traditional clothing beneath a wool blanket, intricate beadwork visible at the edges. The younger man knelt beside him, murmuring something in a language Abigail didn't understand. His movements were fluid, efficient, as he unwrapped the blanket from the old man's shoulders and checked him over with careful hands. "He needs tea," the younger man said without looking up. "Do you have herbs? Something for the lungs?" Abigail nodded stiffly. She kept the rifle within reach as she moved to a shelf of jars and pouches, remedies and dried plants she'd gathered herself or traded for on rare trips to town. "I have horehound and mullein," she said, selecting 2 jars, "and honey from last summer." "Good." The man finally looked at her. "Thank you." The simple gratitude caught her off guard. She turned away quickly, setting a kettle of water on the hook above the fire. An uncomfortable silence settled between them as she worked, broken only by the old man's labored breathing and the crackle of the fire. Abigail kept her movements deliberate, her senses alert. The weight of her father's pocket pistol pressed against her side, hidden in the folds of her nightgown beneath her woolen robe. A precaution. "I'm Daniel," the younger man said suddenly. "Daniel Redpath. This is my father, Silver Cloud." Abigail paused in her preparation of the tea. Names made them more real, harder to think of as threats. She considered not offering her own name in return, but old habits of courtesy won out. "Abigail Calloway," she replied, her voice clipped. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, recognition perhaps, but he said nothing more, turning his attention back to his father. While the water heated, Abigail took stock of her visitors. Daniel appeared to be in his early 30s, his body lean and strong. The scar on his face told of violence survived. His hands, though, were gentle as he tended to the old man, wiping blood from his lips with a cloth. Silver Cloud's eyes fluttered open as Abigail approached with the steaming cup of tea. They were dark like his son's, but clouded with age and illness. Still, they focused on her with startling clarity. "The herbs will help ease his breathing," Abigail explained, handing the cup to Daniel. "The honey will soothe his throat." Daniel nodded, helping his father sit up straighter to drink. Silver Cloud accepted the cup with trembling hands, inhaling the steam before sipping carefully. "You have healer hands," Silver Cloud said, his voice rough, but his English clear. "Like your father." The words struck Abigail like a physical blow. She stepped back, nearly stumbling over a footstool. "You didn't know my father," she said sharply. Silver Cloud merely closed his eyes, returning to his tea. Daniel watched her, his expression unreadable. "We'll be gone by morning," Daniel said after a moment. "Once the storm passes." Abigail nodded stiffly, retreating to the small table across the room. She sat down, rifle across her lap, determined to keep watch through the night. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, its steady rhythm, a reminder of a time when this cabin had been filled with family and laughter. Before the fire, before the whispers, before she became the witch of Calloway Cabin. As the night deepened, Silver Cloud drifted into an uneasy sleep. In the rocking chair, his breathing slightly improved, but still worryingly wet. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, back straight, eyes half closed, but alert. Neither spoke, and eventually the only sounds were the wind outside, the ticking of the clock, and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Despite her intention to stay awake, exhaustion began to tug at Abigail's eyelids. She fought it, focusing on the rifle in her lap, on the strangers in her home. But the warmth of the fire and the hypnotic ticking of the clock conspired against her. Her head nodded once, twice. Her eyes closed. When she startled awake, the fire had burned lower, and moonlight streamed through the windows. The storm had quieted somewhat, though snow still fell in thick flakes visible in the silvery beam. Daniel hadn't moved from his position, but his eyes were fully open now, watching her. Not with threat, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. Embarrassed and annoyed at her lapse, Abigail stood stretching cramped muscles. She moved to the window, putting distance between herself and her visitors while maintaining her view of them. Outside, the world was transformed into something ethereal and silent. The moonlight caught each snowflake, turning the ordinary into something magical. In sleep, with the lines of pain eased from his face, Silver Cloud looked peaceful, not the threatening savage of town gossip, but simply an old man, ill and vulnerable. And Daniel, in the silver glow of moonlight, there was a sorrow in his stillness that reminded Abigail of herself. The thought was unwelcome. She didn't want to see anything of herself in these strangers, didn't want to feel the stirring of connection that threatened her carefully constructed isolation. "You should sleep," Daniel said softly, breaking the silence. "I will keep watch." "In my home," Abigail replied with a raised eyebrow. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Fair point." She returned to her chair, but the rigid vigilance had left her. For the first time in years, Abigail realized she wasn't completely alone. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. Dawn was still hours away when Silver Cloud stirred, mumbling in his native tongue. Daniel leaned closer, responding quietly. Abigail watched from her post alert once more. Silver Cloud's eyes opened, focusing not on his son, but on a framed photograph on the mantel above him. He raised a gnarled finger, pointing at it. "Samuel Calloway," he said, his voice stronger than before. Abigail rose so quickly her chair scraped across the wooden floor. "What did you say?" Silver Cloud looked at her, really looked at her as if seeing through to her core. "Samuel Calloway," he repeated. "Your father." She crossed the room in 3 strides, snatching the photograph from the mantel. It showed her family as they had been, her father tall and distinguished in his judge's attire, her mother elegant beside him, Abigail herself at 25, and her younger brother Thomas just 16. The photograph had been taken merely months before the fire that claimed them all 10 years ago. "How do you know my father's name?" Abigail demanded, clutching the frame so tightly her knuckles whitened. Daniel stood, his posture non-threatening but prepared to intervene if necessary. Silver Cloud, however, remained calm, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. "We were brothers," Silver Cloud said simply. "Not by blood, by choice." "But that's impossible," Abigail whispered, though something cold and certain settled in her stomach. "My father was Samuel Calloway, district judge for the territory. He wouldn't. War makes strange brothers," Silver Cloud continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "When men face death together, skin color matters less." "The war?" Abigail's voice faltered. Her father had rarely spoken of his time in the Union Army during the Civil War. It was a chapter of his life kept tightly sealed, even from his family. Silver Cloud nodded, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. "Second Bull Run. Your father pulled me from a creek where I lay wounded. I had been a scout. He was a captain then." The details were too specific to be fabricated. Abigail lowered herself slowly onto the footstool, the photograph still clutched in her hands. "He never mentioned you," she said, though there was less accusation in her tone now. "White men often don't speak of Indian friends to their families," Silver Cloud replied without bitterness. "But he showed me this." He gestured to the photograph, carried it in his coat, spoke of his brilliant daughter with the fire hair, said she had his sense of justice and her mother's kindness. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. She blinked them away furiously, unwilling to show such weakness before strangers. And yet, were they truly strangers, if her father had called this man brother? "Why are you here?" she asked, forcing strength into her voice. "After all these years." Silver Cloud and Daniel exchanged a look laden with meaning. The old man nodded once, and Daniel turned to Abigail. "We didn't stumble upon your cabin by accident," he admitted. "My father has been dreaming of you for months. He insisted we find the daughter of Samuel Calloway." "Dreaming of me?" Abigail's hand moved instinctively toward her hidden pistol. "What does that mean?" "My father has the sight," Daniel explained, his tone matter-of-fact rather than mystical. "Sometimes he sees things before they happen. Sometimes he sees people who need help or who can help us." "I don't believe in such things," Abigail said flatly. Silver Cloud's laugh turned into a cough. When he recovered, he fixed her with a penetrating stare. "What you believe does not change what is true, daughter of Samuel." The way he said it, daughter of Samuel, sent a shiver down Abigail's spine. It felt both foreign and strangely familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby. "Why would your dreams bring you here?" she persisted. "What could I possibly do for you?" Silver Cloud looked to his son again, a silent communication passing between them. Daniel seemed reluctant, but eventually nodded. "We believe you have something we need," Daniel said carefully. "Something your father kept safe. Something that could bring justice to many who have suffered." Abigail stood backing away from them both, her guard fully raised again. "I don't know what you're talking about. My father left nothing but this cabin and memories." "Are you certain?" Daniel pressed. "Did he never mention documents, papers that might seem unimportant to you?" "No." But even as she said it, Abigail remembered the fireproof box her father had kept beneath the floorboards in his study. She'd found it after the tragedy, but it had been empty. She'd assumed the contents had been legal papers, perhaps deeds, or wills related to his work as a judge. Silver Cloud watched her face closely. "You know something," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know that it's nearly dawn," Abigail replied, changing the subject, "and that your father needs proper medicine, not just my herbal tea." Daniel seemed ready to press the issue, but Silver Cloud laid a hand on his arm. "Time," the old man said softly. "She needs time." Outside, the sky had indeed begun to lighten the black of night, softening to deep blue. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine white blanket over everything. It would be a clear, bitter, cold day. "There's a town," Daniel said clearly, deciding to follow his father's lead. "Sugar Creek. Is it far?" "Half a day's ride in good weather," Abigail answered. "Longer in snow this deep, but they won't welcome you there." "They don't welcome you either," Silver Cloud observed shrewdly. "I see it in your eyes." "Why?" Abigail turned away, busying herself with rekindling the fire. "People believe what they want to believe," she said eventually. "They decided I was cursed. Dangerous. It was easier than accepting the truth." "Which is?" Daniel asked. Abigail's hands stilled on the poker. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fresh flames catching on the kindling. "That bad things happen to good people," she said finally. "And that sometimes There's no one to blame. She paused, gazing out the window at the snow-covered valley where she had spent the last 10 years of her life, from age 25 to 35, living with whispers and isolation. Daniel nodded slowly as if he understood perfectly. Perhaps he did. "My father needs medicine you don't have," he said. "Will you come with us to this town? They might sell to you when they wouldn't to us." Abigail hesitated. She rarely went to Sugar Creek anymore, making the journey only when absolutely necessary. Each trip meant enduring stares and whispers, crossed streets, and uneasy silence. But looking at Silver Cloud, she could see the bluish tint to his lips, hear the wet rattle in his chest. Her herbal remedies might ease his symptoms, but he needed something stronger to fight the infection settling in his lungs. "We'll leave at midday," she decided. "When the sun has had time to warm the trail a bit. I need to feed the animals first." Daniel inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said simply. Abigail nodded stiffly before grabbing her heavy coat from its peg and stepping outside. The cold air hit her like a slap, clearing her head. She trudged through knee-deep snow to the small barn where her 2 horses, cow, and handful of chickens waited. As she worked, feeding animals, breaking ice in water troughs, mucking stalls, Abigail's mind raced. Why had her father never mentioned Silver Cloud? What documents could be so important that these two would brave a blizzard to find her? And why did she feel a strange sense of recognition when the old man spoke of her father? By the time she returned to the cabin, the sun had risen fully, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Inside, she found Daniel had prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, using supplies he'd found in her kitchen. Silver Cloud sat at the table looking marginally better after a night by the fire, though still alarmingly weak. "I hope you don't mind," Daniel said, gesturing to the pot of mush. "We've been traveling for days with little food." Abigail shook her head. "It's fine," she said, though it felt strange to have someone else cooking in her kitchen. "Eat. You'll need your strength for the journey to town." As they ate in silence, Abigail found herself studying Daniel more openly. In daylight, she could see that his features were a blend of native and white ancestry. His skin was lighter than his father's, his nose straighter. The scar on his face was a stark white line against his copper skin, running from his right temple down to his jaw. It looked like it had been made by a blade, deliberate, not accidental. As he reached for his bowl, his sleeve pulled back, revealing another jagged scar running the length of his forearm. He caught her looking and tugged his sleeve down, his expression closing off. These were not the only scars he carried, Abigail suspected, but they were the ones visible to the eye. Daniel appeared to be in his early 30s, making him close to her own age of 35. "You're staring," Daniel observed without looking up from his bowl. Abigail didn't flinch. "You're strangers in my home. I'm entitled to look at who I'm harboring." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." "You're not full-blooded Cheyenne," she stated, rather than asked. "My mother was white," Daniel confirmed. "A schoolteacher sent to civilize the savages. She fell in love with a Cheyenne warrior instead." There was a fondness in his voice when he spoke of his parents, but underneath it, Abigail sensed old pain. "And Silver Cloud adopted me when my parents were killed," Daniel said matter-of-factly, though his knuckles whitened around his spoon. "I was 12. Abigail wanted to ask more, but held her tongue. Everyone had their griefs, their scars. She, better than most, knew the pain of having others pry into wounds still raw, despite the years. They set out at midday as planned. Abigail hitched her stronger horse to a small sleigh, while Daniel helped Silver Cloud bundle up against the cold. The old man protested that he could ride, but a fit of coughing belied his claims of strength. "The sleigh will be easier on him," Abigail said, arranging blankets on the seat. "And faster, through the snow." Daniel nodded gratefully, helping his father up. Abigail took the reins, and Daniel walked alongside as they set off down the long, winding trail that led eventually to Sugar Creek. The journey was slow, the horse struggling through drifts despite the path Abigail tried to break for it. The sun shone brilliantly overhead, turning the snow into a sea of diamonds painfully bright to look at directly. Their breath plumed in the frigid air. For the first hour they traveled in silence. Silver Cloud dozed beneath the blankets, his breathing labored but steady. Daniel matched the sleigh's pace easily, his stride long and efficient. Occasionally he would look around with the alertness of a man accustomed to watching for threats, but mostly he seemed content to walk quietly. As they crested a hill overlooking a frozen creek, the namesake of the town that lay several miles beyond Abigail finally broke the silence. "You said you're not Silver Cloud's son by birth," she began, keeping her eyes on the trail ahead. "Yet you call him father." Daniel glanced at her, then back at the sleeping form of Silver Cloud. "Family is more than blood," he said simply. "How did he come to adopt you?" Abigail pressed, curious despite herself. Daniel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears, not to disturb the old man's rest. "I told you my parents were killed," he said. "What I didn't say was how." He flexed his gloved hand, as if working feeling back into fingers gone numb. "There were men, white men, who wanted our land. My father, my birth father, had a legal claim to it through my mother. He'd filed all the proper papers with the territorial government." Abigail's hands tightened on the reins. She could guess where this story was going. The parallel to her own loss hit Abigail like a physical blow. She fought to keep her expression neutral. "My mother got me out through a window," Daniel went on. "My father tried to hold them off. I saw him fall. I saw his blood on the snow." His hand moved unconsciously to the scar on his face. "One of them caught me. Had a knife. Said they couldn't leave witnesses, but he'd make it quick if I didn't fight." "Yet you survived," Abigail prompted when he fell silent. Daniel nodded once, his jaw tight. Silver Cloud and other warriors from his band had seen the fire from their camp in the hills. They came to investigate. There was a fight. The men fled. The simple retelling couldn't mask the horror of the experience. Abigail found herself blinking back unexpected tears. For Daniel's loss, yes, but also for the echoes of her own. "I'm sorry," she said softly, the words inadequate but sincere. Daniel looked at her directly, then his dark eyes searching her face. "You understand," he said. Not a question. Abigail turned away, focusing on guiding the horse around a fallen log. "Perhaps." They lapsed into silence again, but it was different now, less guarded, more contemplative. As they continued toward Sugar Creek, Abigail found herself watching the horizon with growing unease. It had been nearly 6 months since her last visit to town. She'd hoped never to return. "There's something you should know before we reach Sugar Creek," she said eventually, pitching her voice low. "The people there, they believe I killed my family." Daniel's step faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Did you?" The blunt question should have angered her, but Abigail found his directness oddly refreshing after years of whispers behind her back. "No," she said firmly. "But I was the only one not home that night. I was caring for a sick friend in town." Her throat tightened around the words. "By the time I returned the next morning, the house was ashes. My parents and brother were gone." "And the town decided you were responsible," Daniel concluded. Abigail nodded. There had been rumors already that I practiced witchcraft, that I'd turned away from God. Foolish superstition because I gathered herbs and preferred books to church socials. Her laugh was bitter. After the fire, the rumors became certainty. The witch of Callaway Cabin had sacrificed her family for power. Yet you stayed, Daniel observed. It was home, Abigail said simply, the only home I had left. I rebuilt the cabin exactly as it was, planted the same garden, kept my father's books on the same shelves. She sighed. Perhaps it was foolish, but I couldn't let them drive me away from the only place I still felt close to my family. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Roots go deep, he said, like the old cottonwood that bends in the storm, but does not break. The poetic observation surprised her. Before she could respond, Silver Cloud stirred beneath his blankets, his eyes fluttering open. We approach the town of Hard Hearts, he said, his voice raspy but clear. Abigail looked ahead. They had indeed come within sight of Sugar Creek. Smoke rose from chimneys in the distance, and the spire of the small church caught the midday sun. Yes, she confirmed, tension creeping back into her shoulders. We should be there within the hour. Silver Cloud struggled to sit up straighter. Be careful, daughter of Samuel, he warned. Danger waits there. The danger is to you, Abigail pointed out. These people hate Indians more than they hate me. Silver Cloud shook his head slowly. The snake that bit once will bite again, he said cryptically. The fire that burned your home still smolders. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold ran down Abigail's spine. Before she could press for an explanation, he needs medicine now, Daniel said urgently. Can we go faster? Abigail nodded, snapping the reins to urge the horse to a faster pace. As they drew closer to Sugar Creek, she pulled her scarf higher to cover her distinctive red hair. It wouldn't prevent recognition. Everyone in the small town knew Abigail Callaway, but it was a symbolic shield against the stares to come. Sugar Creek had grown since its founding 20 years earlier, but it was still small by any standard. A single main street ran through the center, lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a small hotel, a saloon, Dawson's apothecary, the church, and various other businesses. Side streets branched off, leading to modest homes and a few larger houses belonging to the town's more prosperous citizens. As they reached the outskirts, Abigail felt the familiar weight of dread settling in her stomach. She pulled the sleigh to a stop before they reached the first buildings. It would be best if you waited here, she said to Daniel. I'll go to the apothecary alone. What medicines does your father need? Daniel shook his head firmly. I'm coming with you. My father needs to be indoors out of this cold, and I need to tell the apothecary his symptoms exactly. They won't serve you, Abigail insisted. They barely serve me. Then we face their hatred together. Daniel replied, his tone allowing no argument. I will not hide while my father suffers. Abigail wanted to protest further, but Silver Cloud's rattling breath decided the matter. The old man needed warmth and medicine without delay. Stay close then, she conceded, and let me do the talking. They continued into town, the sleigh runners creaking over the packed snow of the main street. Almost immediately, Abigail felt the weight of eyes upon them. A woman sweeping the boardwalk outside the millinery shop stopped mid-stroke, her mouth falling open at the sight of Abigail Callaway, driving a sleigh with an Indian elder bundled inside and a tall native man walking alongside. The woman, Abigail recognized her as Mrs. Peterson, hurried inside, no doubt, to spread the news. Within minutes, faces appeared in windows up and down the street. Men stepped out of the saloon to stare openly. Children were hurried indoors by protective mothers. They act as if we carry the plague, Daniel observed quietly. To them, we do, Abigail replied. The plague of difference. She guided the sleigh directly to Dawson's apothecary, pulling up in front of the hitching post. Daniel helped Silver Cloud down while Abigail secured the horse. Already a small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a cautious distance, but watching with undisguised hostility. Ignore them, Abigail advised, taking Silver Cloud's other arm to help him up the steps to the shop. The old man's weight was alarmingly light between them. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the apothecary. Walter Dawson, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. His expression shifted rapidly from professional interest to shock to poorly concealed revulsion. "Miss Calloway," he said stiffly, "this is unexpected." "Mr. Dawson," Abigail acknowledged with equal formality. "We need medicine. This man has a severe chest infection." Dawson's gaze flickered over Silver Cloud and Daniel, his lips pursing. "I see. And these gentlemen are—" "My guests," Abigail replied firmly, "and in need of immediate medical attention." Dawson hesitated, clearly torn between potential profit and the social implications of serving such customers. Finally, commercial interests won out, though his distaste remained evident. "What symptoms does he present?" Dawson asked, directing the question to Abigail rather than Daniel. Before Abigail could answer, the bell jingled again as the door opened. A woman in an expensive fur coat swept in, her eyes widening at the sight before her. Beatrice Thompson, widow of the late bank manager and self-appointed moral guardian of Sugar Creek. "Well, well," Beatrice drawled, closing the door behind her with deliberate slowness. "If it isn't Abigail Calloway. We'd begun to think you'd finally left our good town for more suitable company." Her gaze raked over Daniel and Silver Cloud. "Though I see you've simply found it elsewhere." Abigail straightened her spine, turning to face the woman directly. "Mrs. Thompson, still concerning yourself with others' affairs, I see." Beatrice's painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "When those affairs are brought into our decent town, it becomes everyone's concern." She raised her voice slightly, though they were the only customers in the shop. "Look at you. The witch of Calloway Cabin has finally found herself a man. Only a savage would have her, of course." Daniel tensed beside Abigail, but she laid a restraining hand on his arm. This was familiar territory for her, if unwelcome. "Mr. Dawson," she said, turning back to the apothecary and ignoring Beatrice entirely. "We need carbolic acid laudanum for the pain and any powders you have for respiratory infection." Dawson glanced nervously between Abigail and Beatrice, clearly uncomfortable being caught between the town pariah and its most influential gossip. "I'll, see what I have," he mumbled, retreating to the shelves at the back of the shop. "You always did think yourself above the rest of us," Beatrice continued, undeterred by Abigail's attempt to ignore her. "Just like your father with his fancy Eastern education and his talk of justice. Look where it got him and you." Abigail's hand tightened on Daniel's arm, though whether to restrain him or herself, she wasn't certain. The mention of her father sent a wave of anger through her, hot and sudden. "My father believed in dignity and decency," Abigail said, her voice low but steady. "Two concepts you seem unfamiliar with, Mrs. Thompson." Beatrice's face flushed an unflattering shade of red beneath her powder. "How dare you? After what you did—" "She did nothing," Daniel interrupted, his deep voice filling the small shop, "except show kindness to those in need." Beatrice's eyes widened as if shocked that an Indian would dare address her directly. "Well," she huffed, "it speaks, and with such fine English, too." Her gaze slid to Silver Cloud, who had begun to sway on his feet. "Though its elder seems to be losing the battle with the bottle already. It's not even noon. He's ill. Abigail snapped, her patience fracturing. Something a woman of Christian charity might show concern for. Before Beatrice could retort, the door opened again. This time the figure who entered silenced even Beatrice Thompson. Roland Hunter, mayor of Sugar Creek, filled the doorway with his imposing presence. In his late 50s, Hunter had the physique of a much younger man, broad-shouldered and straight-backed. His salt-and-pepper hair was impeccably groomed beneath a black hat, and his suit spoke of wealth unusual for such a small frontier town. Most distinctive, however, was the scar tissue that covered the left side of his face, a burn that had left that side twisted and rigid, the eye a milky white. "I thought the reports must be exaggerated," Hunter said, his voice cultured despite its coldness. "But here you are indeed, Miss Calloway, bringing your particular brand of trouble back to our town." Abigail felt Daniel go completely still beside her. Something in his posture changed. A new tension coiled and dangerous. She glanced at him, alarmed by the transformation, and saw his eyes fixed on Hunter's scarred face with an intensity that bordered on feral. "Mayor Hunter," she acknowledged, trying to draw attention away from Daniel's reaction, "we're simply here to purchase medicine." Hunter's good eyes swept over them, lingering on Silver Cloud's weakened state and Daniel's rigid stance. "Medicine," he repeated skeptically, "and then you'll be on your way. I trust Sugar Creek has no place for—" He paused, seemingly searching for a diplomatic term. "Undesirable elements." "My father is dying," Daniel said, his voice controlled but vibrating with an emotion Abigail couldn't identify. "We'll leave when we have what we came for." Hunter's gaze settled on Daniel fully for the first time. Something flickered across the mayor's face. Confusion, then a flash of what might have been recognition, quickly masked. "You seem familiar, boy," Hunter said, taking a step closer. "Have we met?" "No," Daniel replied, though his hand had moved unconsciously to the scar on his face. "We have not met." The tension in the room was palpable. Dawson hovered uncertainly behind his counter-medicines gathered, but unwilling to approach. Beatrice watched the exchange with undisguised fascination, clearly storing away every detail for later embellishment. Silver Cloud chose that moment to collapse his legs, giving way beneath him. Daniel caught him before he hit the floor, cradling the old man with surprising gentleness, despite the barely contained fury Abigail sensed in him. "The medicine," Abigail demanded, turning to Dawson. "Now, please." The urgency in her voice seemed to break the spell. Dawson hurried forward with his supplies. "That will be $5, he said, naming a price at least twice what it should have been. Abigail didn't argue. She pulled the money from her purse and handed it over, taking the package of medicines in return. "We need to get him somewhere warm," she said to Daniel, deliberately turning her back on Hunter and Beatrice. "The hotel won't have us. We'll have to return to the cabin." "A wise decision," Hunter interjected smoothly. "Though in your father's day, Miss Calloway, even he would have thought twice before harboring Indians in our county. Times change, but certain principles should remain constant." Abigail spun to face him, anger overriding caution. "My father believed in justice for all people, Mayor Hunter, not just those whose skin color or religion matched his own." Hunter's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Ah, yes, Samuel Calloway and his famous principles. Look where they led him," and his good eye gleamed with something like triumph. "And now his daughter follows the same dangerous path. Be careful, Miss Calloway. You're already half an outcast. Don't give us reason to take the rest." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Abigail held his gaze for a long moment, refusing to show fear. "Good day, Mayor Hunter. she said finally, turning to help Daniel with Silver Cloud. Mrs. Thompson. They left the apothecary with as much dignity as they could muster, Daniel supporting most of Silver Cloud's weight. Outside, the crowd had grown murmurs, rippling through it as they emerged. "We need to leave," Abigail said quietly, helping Daniel get Silver Cloud back into the sleigh. "Now!" As they prepared to depart, a young deputy approached his hand, resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Mayor Hunter suggests you be on your way by sundown," he said, trying to sound authoritative despite his youth. "All of you." "We're leaving now," Abigail assured him, climbing onto the driver's seat of the sleigh. "Please stand aside." The deputy hesitated, then stepped back, allowing Daniel to take his place beside Abigail. With a snap of the reins, they were moving again, the crowd parting reluctantly before them. As they left town, Abigail could feel the weight of stares on her back. But more concerning was the rigid set of Daniel's shoulders beside her, and the way his eyes had never left Mayor Hunter's face. "You recognized him," she said once they were beyond the town limits. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees, his breathing carefully controlled. "The scar," he said finally. "The burn on his face. I gave him that." Abigail's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "The night my parents were killed." Daniel explained, his voice distant, as if speaking from across a great divide of time. "One of the men caught me, had a knife to my throat." His hand rose unconsciously to the scar on his face. "I managed to grab a burning brand from our house, struck him across the face with it. That's when he gave me this." He traced the scar from temple to jaw. "I always wondered if he survived the burn." "You think Mayor Hunter was that man?" Abigail asked, though she already knew the answer. "I know he was," Daniel replied with absolute certainty. "I would recognize those eyes anywhere. I've seen them in my nightmares for 20 years. The implications were staggering. If Daniel was right, the respected mayor of Sugar Creek, a man who had led the town for over a decade, was a murderer who had participated in the slaughter of an innocent family. "Did you see the other men?" Abigail asked, her mind racing. "Could you recognize them too?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "They wore coverings over their faces. Hunter's fell off during our struggle. That's why he wanted to kill me so badly. I had seen him." Silver Cloud stirred beneath his blankets, his eyes opening to fix on Daniel. "The circle closes," he murmured in his native tongue before switching to English. "You have found the first wolf, my son." "Rest, Father," Daniel urged, turning to check on the old man. "We have the medicine now." As they traveled back toward the cabin, Abigail's thoughts whirled. The encounter in town had been even more disastrous than she'd feared. Not only had they attracted dangerous attention, but they had inadvertently stumbled upon a connection she never could have imagined. "Your father said, 'the first wolf,'" she noted as they crested the hill, overlooking the frozen creek once more. "Were there others you've been seeking?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at Silver Cloud, who had drifted back to sleep. "The men who killed my family were 6, he said eventually. "I've spent years trying to find them, to bring them to justice." "Not revenge?" Abigail asked, studying his profile. "Justice," Daniel repeated firmly. "My father, Silver Cloud, taught me the difference. Revenge consumes the seeker. Justice heals the community." It sounded like something her own father might have said, Abigail realized with a start. Another unexpected connection between these strangers and her past. As the afternoon waned, the temperature dropped further. The sun began its early winter descent, casting long blue shadows across the snow. By the time they reached the cabin, twilight was settling over the valley, turning the snow from white to blue to silver in the rising moonlight. Once inside, they worked quickly to make Silver Cloud comfortable. Abigail prepared the medicines while Daniel built up the fire. The old man accepted the bitter mixture without complaint, though his face contorted at the taste. "It will help you rest," Abigail assured him, arranging blankets around his thin frame. "The infection will take time to clear, but this should ease the symptoms." Silver Cloud grasped her wrist with surprising strength. "You have questions," he stated, rather than asked. Abigail nodded slowly. "Many." "Ask," Silver Cloud encouraged, "while I still have breath to answer." Daniel stood nearby, watching them both with an unreadable expression. Abigail sank into a chair opposite Silver Cloud, gathering her thoughts. "You said you knew my father during the war," she began. "But that was over 20 years ago. Why seek me out now? What could I possibly have that you need after all this time?" Silver Cloud's eyes drifted to the fire, as if seeing something in the dancing flames that Abigail could not. "Your father contacted me," he said, 6 months before his death. He sent a letter through an old army friend who knew how to find my people. "What did it say?" Abigail leaned forward, hungry for any connection to her father. "He spoke of corruption," Silver Cloud replied, "of land stolen through false papers, of murders disguised as accidents or blamed on Indians." The old man's gaze returned to Abigail's face. "He said he had proof, documents that would expose powerful men. He feared for his life, daughter of Samuel." A chill crept up Abigail's spine. "Are you saying my father's death wasn't an accident? That the fire was deliberate?" "The same men who killed Daniel's family." Silver Cloud confirmed, his voice growing weaker. "Your father discovered the connection. He was gathering evidence against them when the fire took him." Abigail felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. For 10 years she had lived with the official explanation, a chimney fire, tragic, but not suspicious. She had endured the whispers, the accusations, believing at least that her family's death had been a terrible accident, not murder. "Who?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Who did this?" Silver Cloud's eyes fluttered closed briefly. "The wolves hide in sheep's clothing," he murmured. "But the leader, you met him today." "Hunter," Daniel supplied from his position by the fire. "Roland Hunter." Abigail's hands began to tremble. The mayor had been present in town when her family died. He had even attended the funeral, offering condolences that rang hollow even then. "Why," she whispered, "why would he kill my family? The same reason they killed mine." Daniel said, his voice hard. "Land, money, power." He moved to stand beside Silver Cloud's chair. "My father, my birth father, had legal claim to valuable land near a planned railroad line. Your father was investigating similar claims, wasn't he?" Silver Cloud nodded weakly. "Samuel wrote that he had found a pattern. Land with coal beneath it or near planned railroads mysteriously changing hands. Native owners and white settlers alike driven off or killed. All legal on the surface, but built on blood." "And he had proof," Abigail concluded. "Documents that could expose Hunter and his accomplices." "Yes," Silver Cloud confirmed. "He said he kept them somewhere safe, somewhere they would never look." His eyes, though clouded with illness, fixed on Abigail's face with startling clarity. "He said his daughter would know where when the time came." Abigail shook her head in frustration. "But I don't know. He never told me about any of this." "He protected you with silence," Silver Cloud said gently, "but he must have left a sign, a message only you would understand." Abigail's mind raced through possibilities. Her father had been methodical, careful. If he had hidden important documents, he would have left some clue, but subtle enough that his enemies wouldn't recognize it. "I found a lockbox after the fire," she admitted, hidden under the floorboards in his study, but it was empty. "Or perhaps what you sought was not inside, but the box itself," Silver Cloud suggested. "Did you examine it carefully?" Before Abigail could answer, a sound outside made them all freeze. The distant but unmistakable crunch of hooves on snow. Daniel moved swiftly to the window, peering out into the moonlit night. His body tensed at whatever he saw. "Riders," he reported grimly. "At least 4. Coming up the trail." Abigail rose, crossing quickly to join him. Through the frosted glass, she could make out dark shapes moving against the snow horsemen, approaching her cabin with deliberate purpose. "Hunter," she breathed, understanding dawning with cold certainty. "He recognized you. He knows who you are, what you know. And now he's coming to finish what he started 20 years ago." Daniel's face hardened into a mask of controlled anger. "Let him try," he said quietly. Silver Cloud struggled to rise from his chair. "No, my son. Not like this. Not with hatred in your heart." "They killed my parents," Daniel replied, his voice tight. "They killed Abigail's family. How many others have they murdered for their greed? It ends tonight. Violence against violence creates only more pain," Silver Cloud insisted, though the effort of speaking brought on another coughing fit. Abigail moved with sudden purpose, crossing to a cabinet and withdrawing her rifle. "This is my home," she said firmly. "I won't be driven from it again, not by fire, not by men like Hunter." The riders drew closer now, clearly visible in the moonlight. 4 men on horseback approaching with the confidence of those who believed they had nothing to fear. Daniel and Abigail exchanged a look of perfect understanding. Whatever secrets the past held, whatever connections bound their fates together, one truth was crystal clear: the men who had destroyed their families had come to silence them permanently. And they had no intention of being silenced. The riders drew closer, moonlight glinting off rifle barrels. Abigail's grip tightened on her own weapon as she positioned herself by the front window, drawing the curtain just enough to keep watch. 4 men, she reported quietly. Hunter is leading them. Daniel moved with the silent grace of a hunter checking the cabin's rear window. "No one approaching from behind," he said. "Not yet." Silver Cloud struggled to rise from his chair, his weathered face taut with pain. "This path leads only to more suffering," he warned, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "There must be another way." "Stay where you are," Abigail told him firmly. "You're too weak to move." The old man subsided, but his dark eyes remained alert, watching his son with concern. Daniel had retrieved a hunting knife from his pack, a wicked, curved blade that caught the firelight as he slipped it into his belt. "I won't let them hurt you," Daniel said, the promise directed at both Silver Cloud and Abigail. "Not again." Abigail felt a strange calm descend over her, the kind that comes only in moments of true crisis. For 10 years, she had lived with whispers and accusations, had endured the isolation and the grief. Now, facing the man who might have murdered her family, she felt oddly clear-headed. "We need to know what they want," she decided. "If they meant to simply kill us, they wouldn't announce their arrival like this." Daniel nodded grimly. "Hunter wants something. The documents your father hid, most likely." "Then we have leverage," Abigail realized, "even if I don't know where they are yet." The sound of hoofbeats stopped. Through the window, Abigail could see the riders dismounting about 50 yards from the cabin, their breath clouding in the frigid night air. Hunter stood a moment, his scarred face catching the moonlight as he surveyed the cabin. Even at this distance, there was something predatory in his stance. "Miss Calloway," Hunter's voice carried clearly across the snow, "I believe we have matters to discuss. May we approach?" Abigail and Daniel exchanged glances. The polite tone couldn't mask the menace beneath. "I'll speak to him," Abigail said, moving toward the door. Daniel caught her arm. "It's too dangerous. Let me go." "This is my home," Abigail reminded him, "and I've faced these people for a decade. Besides," she nodded toward Silver Cloud, "your father needs you." Before Daniel could protest further, she had unbarred the door and stepped onto the porch rifle held loosely but visibly in her hands. The bitter cold bit through her woolen dress, but she ignored it, standing tall as she faced the men who had ridden so far in the darkness to find her. "Mayor Hunter," she called, "this is an unexpected visit. What brings you to my property at this hour?" Hunter stepped forward, flanked by 3 men. Abigail recognized the young deputy from town, looking nervous but determined. The others were strangers to her hard-faced men with the look of hired guns. "Miss Calloway." Hunter greeted his tone cordial despite the circumstances. "I apologize for the late hour, but certain matters couldn't wait until morning." His good eye flicked to the cabin behind her. "I see you're still entertaining your guests." "My guests are resting," Abigail replied evenly. "The old man is very ill." "So I observed." Hunter took another step forward, close enough now that Abigail could see the waxy sheen of his scarred skin in the moonlight. "But I'm more concerned with the younger man. Daniel Redpath. I believe he called himself—" The casual use of Daniel's name sent a chill down Abigail's spine. Hunter hadn't been close enough to hear their conversation in the apothecary. "You've been making inquiries," she noted. A thin smile stretched Hunter's twisted mouth. "I make it my business to know who enters my town, Miss Calloway, particularly when they bring trouble with them." "The only trouble came from your citizens' hostility," Abigail countered. "We simply sought medicine for a dying man." Hunter's expression hardened. "Let's dispense with the pretense, shall we, that dying man is Silver Cloud's spiritual leader of a band of Cheyenne who have caused nothing but problems for the civilized development of this territory. And his companion—" Hunter's voice took on an edge. "Well, we have much to discuss about him." "Then discuss it with me," came Daniel's voice from behind Abigail. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light of the cabin. He stepped out to join her on the porch, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. Hunter's good eye widened slightly, whether in surprise or recognition, Abigail couldn't tell. "Mr. Redpath," he said after a moment. "Or should I call you by your Cheyenne name? Though I suppose you're only half Cheyenne, aren't you?" "What do you want, Hunter?" Daniel asked bluntly, ignoring the taunt. Hunter regarded them both for a long moment, his breath clouding in the cold air. "I want what was stolen from me," he said finally. "Information that belongs to me and my associates. Information that Samuel Calloway took before his unfortunate accident." The casual reference to her father's murder sent a surge of rage through Abigail. Her finger twitched against the trigger guard of her rifle. "My father stole nothing," she said coldly. "If he had evidence of crimes, it was gathered legally through his position as a judge." "Evidence," Hunter repeated, his tone mocking. "Is that what he called it? Fabrications and misrepresentations, more like? Your father was determined to paint honest business dealings as some kind of conspiracy." He shook his head in feigned sadness. "A brilliant mind wasted on misguided principles. Honest business dealings don't require murder." Daniel interjected, his voice vibrating with controlled anger. Hunter's gaze snapped to him, suddenly sharp. Careful, boy. Accusations of that nature can be dangerous. Not accusations, Daniel replied. Facts. You and your men, 6 of you with covered faces, attacked my family's homestead 20 years ago. You burned our home while we slept and tried to kill me. His hand rose to the scar on his face. You left your mark that night, but I left mine too. He nodded toward Hunter's burned face, the evidence of their past encounter plain for all to see. For a fraction of a second, Hunter's composure slipped. Something like fear flickered in his eye, quickly masked by contempt. Interesting story, he said smoothly. But this burn came from a mining accident. Anyone in town will verify it. I don't need verification, Daniel responded. I remember your eyes as you held the knife to my throat. I remember the sound you made when I struck you with that burning brand. Some things a man never forgets. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Hunter's men shifted uneasily, hands moving toward their weapons. Enough, Hunter snapped. I didn't ride out here to exchange stories with half-breeds. He turned his attention back to Abigail. Miss Calloway, I'll be direct. Your father had documents, deeds, records, correspondence that were taken from my office. I want them returned. I don't have them, Abigail answered truthfully. If my father had such papers, they were lost in the fire that you started. Hunter's face hardened. Be very careful, Miss Calloway. You've managed to live as an outcast for 10 years, but that arrangement can change. There are worse fates than loneliness. The threat hung in the air between them, as tangible as the frost. You've already taken everything from me, Abigail said, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. My family, my place, in the community. What more could you possibly do? There's always more to lose, Hunter replied softly. This cabin, for instance, the land it stands on. Even outcasts need somewhere to sleep. His gaze drifted meaningfully to Daniel. Or perhaps you found something new to care about. Someone even. Daniel took a half-step forward, his body tense with barely restrained violence. Abigail laid a hand on his arm, feeling the muscles bunched beneath his sleeve. What do you really want, Hunter? She demanded. The papers, he repeated. Samuel had a journal as well, leather-bound with his initials embossed on the cover. I want that too. Abigail's breath caught. Her father's journal. She'd found it after the fire, half-burned but still legible in parts. She'd kept it all these years, reading it sometimes when the loneliness became too much to bear. If such a journal existed, it would have burned with everything else, she lied, meeting Hunter's gaze steadily. He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth there. I'll give you 1 day, he said finally. Search your memory. Search this cabin. Find what I'm looking for, and I'll ensure you're left in peace for the rest of your days. And if I find nothing, Abigail challenged. Hunter's scarred mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. Then I'll be forced to take more definitive action. The good people of Sugar Creek have tolerated the Witch of Calloway Cabin for a decade, but their patience has limits, especially when it comes to harboring dangerous Indians. He turned to go, but Daniel's voice stopped him. The men who were with you that night, Daniel said, the ones who helped you murder my family, are they here in Sugar Creek too? Hunter paused, glancing back over his shoulder. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Redpath, but I would advise against spreading such wild accusations. Small towns have long memories and short tempers. His eye gleamed in the moonlight. 1 day, Miss Calloway. I'll return tomorrow night. Have what I seek or prepare for consequences. With that, he rejoined his men. They mounted their horses and rode away, hoofbeats fading into the night, leaving only the sound of the wind and the faint creak of the cabin's timbers. Abigail stood motionless until they were out of sight, her body numb from more than just the cold. When Daniel touched her shoulder, she nearly jumped. "You're freezing," he said gently. "Come inside." She nodded, allowing him to guide her back into the cabin. The warmth enveloped her, but the chill in her core remained. Silver Cloud watched them from his chair by the fire, his eyes knowing. "The wolves showed their teeth," he observed quietly. "And made their demands," Daniel confirmed, helping Abigail to a seat. "They want documents that might expose their crimes." "They want my father's journal," Abigail added, rubbing her arms to restore circulation. "Hunter mentioned it specifically." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "You have it." Abigail hesitated, years of caution making her reluctant to reveal even this small truth. But these men had risked their lives by coming here, had shared their own painful histories. If she couldn't trust them, she could trust no one. "Yes," she admitted. "It survived the fire, partly at least. Some pages were burned, but most remained intact. I've kept it hidden all these years." "May I see it?" Daniel asked. Abigail rose, moving to the stone fireplace. She knelt and carefully removed a loose brick from the hearth, reaching into the space behind it. From this hiding place, she withdrew a leather-bound book. Its edges charred, the initials SC still visible on the cover. She held it for a moment, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. This journal contained her father's thoughts, his private reflections, things he'd never shared with her in life. Reading it had been like having conversations with him long after he was gone. "Here," she said, passing it to Daniel. He took it, carefully aware of its significance to her. Silver Cloud watched with interest as Daniel opened the journal, leafing gently through its fire-damaged pages. "Your father had a strong hand," Daniel noted, studying the neat, precise handwriting. "A methodical mind." "He was a judge," Abigail said simply, as if that explained everything. In many ways, it did. Samuel Calloway had approached life with the same careful consideration he brought to his legal decisions. Daniel continued turning pages until he reached entries from the months before Samuel's death. He paused, reading more carefully now. "Listen to this," he said, looking up at Abigail. "Met with C today regarding the Hunter situation. Evidence mounting that their syndicate has been systematically acquiring land through intimidation and fraud. C provided names of 3 families driven from their claims under suspicious circumstances." Daniel looked up. "This entry is dated just 2 months before your father died." "Who was C?" Abigail wondered aloud. "A confidential informant, perhaps," Daniel suggested. "Someone inside Hunter's organization with access to information." He turned to another entry dated 3 weeks later. "Disturbing news from the reservation. Silver Cloud reports that 2 Cheyenne families who held legal land grants have disappeared. Officials claim they simply moved on, but SC believes foul play. Pattern consistent with other cases." Abigail's eyes widened. "My father was in contact with Silver Cloud back then, investigating the same pattern of land theft." Silver Cloud nodded weakly from his chair. "Samuel wrote to me often in those final months. He was connecting many threads into one rope that could hang Hunter and his partners." Daniel continued reading, his expression growing more troubled with each entry. "Hunter's syndicate appears to be acquiring land along the proposed railroad route before the official survey is even published. Someone in the territorial government must be providing insider information." He looked up. "Your father was uncovering a conspiracy that went beyond just Hunter." "Keep reading." Abigail urged, a sense of dread and validation mingling in her chest. Her father hadn't been paranoid or misguided, as Hunter had claimed. He'd been systematically building a case. Daniel flipped a few more pages. Met with Wilson today. He agrees the evidence is compelling, but advises caution. As territorial judge, he can bring formal charges once we have the complete documentation. He suggested creating duplicate records and storing them separately, a wise precaution. Judge Wilson, Abigail breathed. Edmund Wilson. He was my father's colleague and friend. They worked several cases together. Another potential ally, Daniel noted. If he's still alive, still in the territory. He was at my family's funeral. Abigail recalled the memory surfacing like a stone from deep water. He tried to speak with me afterward, but I couldn't talk to anyone then. She looked at the journal entry again. My father trusted him. If we managed to find these documents, Wilson might be the person to take them to. Daniel continued reading, his expression growing more troubled with each entry. Hunter's syndicate appears to be acquiring land along the proposed railroad route before the official survey is even published. Someone in the territorial government must be providing insider information. He looked up. Your father was uncovering a conspiracy that went beyond just Hunter. Keep reading. Abigail urged, a sense of dread and validation mingling in her chest. Her father hadn't been paranoid or misguided as Hunter had claimed. He'd been systematically building a case. Daniel turned to one of the last entries dated just a week before the fire. Have secured copies of the fraudulent deeds and the actual territorial records showing the original owners. H's syndicate has been clever, but the paper trail cannot be completely erased. Will bring evidence to territorial governor next month. Must move carefully now, too many powerful men implicated. He closed the journal gently. Your father was close to exposing them all. That's why they killed him and your family. Abigail sank back into her chair, the weight of this confirmation pressing down on her. For 10 years she had lived with uncertainty, with the official explanation of a tragic accident. Now, the truth lay exposed, as raw and painful as a fresh wound. But where are the documents he mentioned? She asked, struggling to focus on the practical question. The deeds, the records? He said he'd secured copies, but I never found anything like that after the fire. Silvercloud stirred in his chair. Samuel was clever, he said. He would not keep such dangerous evidence where it could be easily found or destroyed. He mentioned a secure location in one of the earlier entries. Daniel recalled reopening the journal and paging backward. Here, have moved sensitive materials to secure location. Even A doesn't know about this precaution, which pains me, but her safety must come first. A would be me, Abigail murmured. Abigail. Your father hid the evidence somewhere you wouldn't know to look, Daniel concluded. Somewhere Hunter and his men wouldn't think to search. But where? Abigail's frustration bubbled up. I've lived in this cabin for 10 years. I've repaired it, cleaned it, made it mine again after the fire. If there were hidden documents, wouldn't I have found them by now? Silvercloud's voice came softly from beside the fire. Perhaps not in the cabin at all. Both Abigail and Daniel turned to look at him. What do you mean? Abigail asked. Samuel spoke to me of a special place. Silvercloud explained, his voice growing weaker with each word. A place where he went to think when troubles weighed heavily. A place, he said, only his daughter would know. Abigail's mind raced through possibilities. Her father had indeed had such a spot. A large boulder overlooking the valley where he would sometimes go in the evenings to smoke his pipe and watch the sunset. She and her father had spent many quiet hours there together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence. "The thinking stone," she whispered. Silver Cloud nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Yes, he called it that." "It's about a mile from here," Abigail explained to Daniel. "A large boulder on the ridge. My father loved to sit there, said it helped him see problems from a higher perspective." "Could he have hidden documents there somehow?" Daniel asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Abigail shook her head. "It's just a boulder on exposed ground. There's nowhere to—" She stopped abruptly as a memory surfaced. "Unless—" "What?" Daniel prompted. "There's a crevice on the western face of the stone," Abigail said slowly, the memory becoming clearer. "My father used to joke that it was the stone's pocket, where it kept its secrets." She looked up, excitement building. "It's deep enough that something could be hidden inside, protected from the elements by the overhang." Daniel was already on his feet. "We should check it immediately." Silver Cloud raised a hand. "Wait until dawn," he advised. "The night belongs to wolves now. They may be watching still." Abigail glanced toward the window, suddenly aware of how exposed they would be on the ridge in moonlight. "Silver Cloud is right," she agreed reluctantly. "We should wait for daylight. First light, we'll go." Daniel paced the small cabin, his restless energy palpable. "And if Hunter returns before we find anything, we know he won't come back until tomorrow night," Abigail reasoned. "He gave us one day." "Men like Hunter don't always keep their word," Daniel pointed out. "True," Abigail conceded. "But he wants those documents badly enough that he'll give us time to find them. He needs us alive and cooperative for now." Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Then we should prepare. If the documents are there, Hunter will know we have them as soon as we try to leave the valley. We'll need a plan." They spent the next hour discussing possibilities, strategies, escape routes. Silver Cloud drifted in and out of consciousness, his brief periods of alertness offering insights, but also reminding them of his precarious condition. The old man needed proper medical care they couldn't provide in this isolated cabin. As the night deepened, Abigail insisted that Daniel rest while she kept watch. To her surprise, he agreed without argument, settling on a bedroll near his father's chair. "Wake me in a few hours," he said. "You'll need sleep, too." Abigail nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily with her mind so full of revelations and her heart heavy with renewed grief. The confirmation of her family's murder had reopened wounds she'd thought long scarred over. She sat by the window rifle across her lap, watching the moonlit valley below. The snow caught the silver light, transforming the familiar landscape into something ethereal and strange. In the distance, the dark line of trees marked the edge of her property, beyond which lay the trail to Sugar Creek. Her thoughts drifted to the town that had once been her home. How many of its citizens had known or suspected the truth about her family's death? How many had turned their backs on her, not from genuine belief in her guilt, but from fear of Hunter and his influence? A soft sound drew her attention back to the cabin's interior. Daniel had shifted in his sleep, his face momentarily contorting, as if in pain. Even unconscious, he carried the weight of his past. Like her, he had spent years living with the aftermath of violence, with unanswered questions and justice denied. In the stillness of the night, watching this stranger who had so unexpectedly become an ally, Abigail felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, a sense of connection. Their shared history of loss had forged a bond between them, unspoken but real. The hours passed slowly. Outside clouds drifted across the moon, casting shifting shadows over the snow. Occasionally an owl called from the forest, edge its cry haunting in the night silence. Abigail maintained her vigil alert to any sign of approaching riders, but the valley remained peaceful. As promised, She woke Daniel when the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. He came awake instantly, fully alert, in a way that spoke of years spent sleeping lightly, ready for danger. "Any trouble?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. "No," she replied. "All quiet." He nodded, moving to check on his father. Silver Cloud still slept, his breathing labored but steady. The medicines from town seemed to have stabilized his condition, though his skin remained alarmingly pale beneath its bronze tone. "He needs to rest," Daniel said, concern evident in his voice. "This journey has taken too much from him." "We'll find the documents and then get him proper help," Abigail assured him. "Once we have evidence against Hunter, everything changes." They prepared quickly, gathering what they might need for the trek to the Thinking Stone. Abigail packed her father's journal securely inside her coat, unwilling to leave it behind. She also tucked her pistol into a pocket, while Daniel armed himself with his knife and a small hatchet. As dawn broke fully across the valley, they left Silver Cloud sleeping by the fire and slipped out of the cabin. The air was bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds before them as they made their way along a narrow path that wound upward toward the ridge. The fresh snow made the going difficult, especially as they climbed higher, and the wind grew stronger. Abigail led the way, following a route so familiar she could have walked it blindfolded. Despite the decade that had passed since she last climbed to her father's Thinking Stone, her feet remembered each turn, each steep section, each place where the path narrowed beside a drop. They reached the ridge as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, casting long golden light across the valley below. The Thinking Stone stood, as it always had, a massive boulder perched near the edge, offering a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. Daniel paused beside it, taking in the vista. "I see why your father came here," he said quietly. "A man could think clearly in such a place." Abigail nodded, running her hand along the stone's weathered surface, feeling the familiar contours beneath her fingers. He said it reminded him that problems that seemed large from below looked much smaller from above. She moved around to the western face of the boulder where the morning sun had not yet reached. There, just as she remembered, was the deep crevice, a natural crack in the stone that extended inward at least an arm's length. "This is it," she said, kneeling beside the opening. "The stone's pocket." Daniel crouched beside her, studying the narrow fissure. "Can you reach inside?" Abigail nodded, already rolling up her sleeve. "It's deeper than it looks, and there's a slight curve. I used to hide little treasures here as a child, pretty stones, a bird's feather. My father always pretended to be surprised when I showed him where they were." She inserted her arm into the crevice, feeling the cold stone against her skin as she reached deeper. Her fingers explored the familiar space, finding nothing at first but smooth rock and a few pebbles. She stretched further her shoulder, now pressed against the boulder's exterior. "There's something," she said suddenly, her fingers brushing against an object that didn't belong. "Something metal." Daniel leaned closer, watching intently as Abigail maneuvered her arm, trying to grasp whatever lay hidden in the depths of the crevice. After several attempts, her fingers closed around it, and she carefully withdrew her arm. In her hand lay a small tin box, the kind that might once have held tobacco. It was weathered and discolored from years of exposure, but still intact, its lid secured with a simple clasp. "This must be it," Abigail breathed, turning the box in her hands. It felt surprisingly heavy for its size. Daniel glanced around, suddenly alert. "We should open it back at the cabin," he suggested. "We're too exposed here." Abigail nodded, tucking the box securely inside her coat next to the journal. They began their descent, moving more quickly now, despite the treacherous footing. The sun had risen, fully illuminating the valley, and the small cabin below, smoke still rising from its chimney. As they approached the tree line that marked the halfway point of their journey, Daniel suddenly threw out an arm, halting Abigail in her tracks. He gestured silently toward a stand of pines to their right. Following his gaze, Abigail saw what had alarmed him, a horse tied among the trees, partially hidden, but visible now in the morning light. "Someone's watching the cabin," Daniel whispered. Abigail's heart raced. Had Hunter left a man behind to observe them? If so, their expedition to the ridge would have been noted. "We need to circle around," she murmured. "Approach from the east instead." Daniel nodded, already adjusting their course to a more circuitous route that would bring them to the cabin from the opposite direction. They moved carefully now, using the trees for cover whenever possible, alert to any sound that might indicate the presence of more observers. It took them nearly an hour to complete what should have been a 20-minute journey. When they finally reached the cabin's eastern side, they paused among a cluster of aspens, studying the building and its surroundings for any sign of danger. "I see no one," Daniel said after a long moment, "but that doesn't mean they're not there." "We have to go in," Abigail pointed out. "Silver Cloud is alone." Daniel's face tightened at the reminder. "I'll go first. Stay behind me." They approached this cabin cautiously, moving from tree to tree, until they reached the small woodshed attached to the eastern wall. From there it was a short dash to the back door, a distance they covered quickly, Daniel leading the way with Abigail close behind. The door was still barred from the inside, just as they had left it. Daniel knocked softly, a pattern they had agreed upon before leaving, 3 quick taps, followed by 2 slower ones. No response came from within. Daniel knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. "Something's wrong," he said, tension evident in his voice. "Stand back." Before Abigail could protest, he had thrown his weight against the door. The wooden bar inside groaned but held. A second impact splintered the frame, and on the third try, the door burst inward. The cabin's interior was dim after the bright morning light outside. Abigail blinked, allowing her eyes to adjust as she followed Daniel inside. The fire had burned low, casting only a faint glow across the room. Silver Cloud's chair by the hearth was empty. "Father?" Daniel called, his voice sharp with concern. A weak cough answered from the far corner of the room. They rushed toward the sound, finding Silver Cloud seated on the floor, his back against the wall, a blanket wrapped around his thin shoulders. Blood stained his lips, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. "What happened?" Daniel demanded, kneeling beside the old man. "Who moved you?" Silver Cloud's eyes opened, focusing on his son with effort. "Young man," he whispered, "came through window while I slept, looking for something." Abigail glanced toward the front of the cabin and saw that one window indeed stood partially open, cold air seeping in around its frame. "Did he hurt you?" Daniel asked, his hands already checking the old man for injuries. Silver Cloud shook his head weakly. "No, frightened when I woke. Ran away." He coughed again, fresh blood appearing on his lips. "I crawled here, safer in corner." Daniel looked at Abigail, his expression grim. "Hunter must have sent someone to search the cabin while we were gone. They expected it to be empty." "The man with the horse," Abigail realized. "He must have been watching, saw us leave, and signaled to someone else." "They're getting desperate," Daniel noted, helping his father back to the chair by the fire, "which means we're close to something they fear." Abigail added wood to the dying embers, coaxing the fire back to life, while Daniel made Silver Cloud comfortable. Once the old man was settled, they gathered at the small table, where Abigail finally withdrew the tin box from inside her coat. "Let's see what my father thought worth hiding," she said, her fingers trembling slightly as she worked the clasp. The lid opened with a soft creak. Inside lay several folded papers, yellowed with age. but well preserved in their metal container. On top of these rested a small key, tarnished but still intact. Abigail removed the papers carefully, unfolding the first one on the table. It was a deed dated 15 years earlier, showing the transfer of land from a Cheyenne family named Red Hawk to the Western Development Company. Western Development, Daniel read over her shoulder. Is that Hunter's company? One of them, Abigail confirmed, remembering details from her father's journal. He has interests in several businesses, all with different names. It helps hide the extent of his holdings. She unfolded the next document, a second deed, for the same property, but this one showing the original owners as still in possession several years after the supposed transfer. The discrepancy was clear evidence of fraud. My father collected contradicting records, Abigail murmured. Proof that the transfers were falsified. There were 6 more pairs of documents, each showing similar discrepancies for different properties. Some had belonged to native families, others to white settlers. The pattern was exactly as Samuel Calloway had described in his journal: land along the planned railroad route, systematically acquired through deception and violence. The final paper was different, a letter written in a flowing hand addressed to Samuel and signed simply C. The informant from the journal, Daniel noted. Abigail read aloud, Samuel enclosed, find the information you requested. H and the others meet tonight to discuss the next acquisitions. 6 properties in total, all along the northern section. They grow bolder with each success. The territorial governor must be made aware before more blood is spilled. I can no longer be part of this, regardless of the consequences to myself. I entrust these copies to your safe keeping until justice can be served. This C was someone inside Hunter's organization, Daniel said. Someone with access to their plans and meetings. Someone who had a change of heart, Abigail added. But who? She turned the letter over, looking for more clues, but the back was blank. The writer had been careful not to reveal too much, even in this private correspondence. What about the key? Daniel asked, pointing to the small metal object still in the box. Abigail picked it up, examining it closely. It was a simple key, the kind that might open a lockbox or small safe. I don't recognize it, she admitted. But it must be important if my father kept it with these documents. Silver Cloud's voice came weakly from his chair. The circle must be completed, he said. Find what the key opens. Abigail turned the key over in her palm, feeling its weight. Another piece of the puzzle, another clue left by her father. But where was the lock it fitted? The bank, she said suddenly. Sugar Creek has a small bank. My father could have rented a safe deposit box there. Under his own name? Daniel asked skeptically. Abigail shook her head. Unlikely if he was being cautious, but perhaps under my name or my mother's. We would need to go into town to check, Daniel pointed out. That's too dangerous now with Hunter watching for us. Abigail frowned, thinking hard. The key had to open something her father believed would be safe from Hunter's reach, yet accessible when needed. A memory stirred, faint at first, then growing clearer. The courthouse, she said softly. My father had access to a secure cabinet in the courthouse where sensitive legal documents were kept. She looked up at Daniel, excitement building. The locks were replaced after a break-in attempt about a year before the fire. Each judge received a new key. Would that key still work? Daniel asked. After all this time? The courthouse hasn't changed much in 10 years, Abigail replied. And Sugar Creek isn't prosperous enough to replace perfectly good locks without reason. Even if it does work, how would we access it? Daniel persisted. The courthouse would be guarded, especially if Hunter suspects what we're looking for. Not heavily guarded, Abigail countered. Sugar Creek is a small town with limited resources. There might be a night watchman, but not much more. It's still too risky, Daniel insisted. Hunter will be watching all the roads into town. Silver Cloud stirred again, his dark eyes finding Abigail's. Sometimes the longest path is the safest, he said enigmatically. Abigail considered his words a plan beginning to form in her mind. There's another way into Sugar Creek, she said slowly. A back trail through the eastern hills. It's longer and more difficult, especially in snow, but it avoids the main road entirely. Hunters and trappers use it sometimes. Daniel's expression remained doubtful. Even if we reach town undetected, the courthouse won't be empty during the day, and at night it will be locked. I know another way in, Abigail revealed. When I was a girl, my father sometimes took me to his office in the evenings. There's a service entrance on the building's north side near where the old jail cells used to be. Few people know about it, and fewer still have keys. She smiled faintly. But the judge's daughter did. Daniel studied her face for a long moment, weighing her words against his own caution. You still have this key. Abigail nodded. In my father's desk, I kept everything of his that survived the fire. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, the first true smile she had seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his eyes that made Abigail's heart beat faster. Samuel Calloway's daughter indeed, he said, admiration evident in his tone, as clever as your father and twice as determined. The unexpected compliment brought a flush to Abigail's cheeks. She turned away ostensibly to check on Silver Cloud, but actually to compose herself. The connection between them had deepened with each shared discovery, each step toward the truth. It was a feeling both exhilarating and terrifying. We'll need to prepare carefully, she said, once she had mastered her emotions. Hunter gave us until tonight, but I don't trust him to keep his word. If we're going to reach the courthouse, we should do it soon tonight, under cover of darkness. What about my father? Daniel asked, his voice lowering. He's too weak to travel, especially by a difficult trail. The question hung heavy in the air. Silver Cloud's condition had deteriorated further, his breathing more labored, his skin taking on a grayish tinge beneath its natural copper. I can stay, the old man offered, his voice barely audible. Complete your journey. Find the truth. No, Daniel said firmly. I won't leave you alone again, not with Hunter's men watching. Abigail considered their options, none of them ideal. They couldn't take Silver Cloud with them. The journey would likely kill him in his weakened state. Leaving him alone was equally dangerous, as the morning's intruder had proven. There might be another way, she said hesitantly. Someone who could help us. Daniel looked at her questioningly. James Thornton, Abigail explained, the young deputy who was with Hunter last night. He's new to Sugar Creek, only been here a few months. His father was a friend of my father's years ago. Hunter's man? Daniel asked incredulously. You want to trust one of Hunter's men? I'm not sure he is Hunter's man, not completely, Abigail countered. I've seen him in town a few times. He's always been respectful, even kind. Once he helped me when some local boys were harassing me. Kindness doesn't equal trustworthiness, Daniel pointed out. No, Abigail agreed, but he's also the son of Thomas Thornton, a lawyer who once worked with my father on several cases. My father spoke highly of him in his journal. Daniel still looked skeptical. Even if he's sympathetic, approaching him is dangerous. How would you even contact him without Hunter knowing? Abigail bit her lip, considering. There's a trading post about 3 miles from here run by an old trapper named Ferguson. He has no love for Hunter or the town authorities. He might be willing to get a message to Thornton discreetly. A message saying what exactly Please help us incriminate your boss." Despite the tension, Abigail couldn't help a small smile at Daniel's dry tone. Something more subtle. A reference his father would understand that might make him curious enough to come alone. Daniel thought for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "It's a risk, but perhaps a necessary one. I won't leave my father unprotected, and we need those documents from the courthouse." "I'll go to Ferguson's now," Abigail decided. "It's best if I go alone. He knows me, and a stranger might make him suspicious." "No," Daniel said immediately. "It's too dangerous for you to travel alone with Hunter's men watching." "I know these woods better than they do," Abigail reminded him. "And Ferguson won't help if he sees me with—" She hesitated. "An Indian," Daniel finished for her, his tone neutral. "A stranger," Abigail corrected. "Ferguson is cautious by nature. He survived this long by minding his own business and keeping his distance from trouble." Daniel still looked unhappy with the plan, but he understood the logic. "How long will it take?" 3 hours, there and back if the snow isn't too deep," Abigail estimated. "I'll be careful. Stay off the main trails." "If you're not back by midday, I'm coming after you," Daniel warned. Abigail nodded, accepting the condition. She gathered what she would need, a small pack with water and provisions, her rifle, and a warm coat. Before leaving, she knelt briefly beside Silver Cloud. "Rest," she told him gently. "Save your strength. We'll find the truth your brother Samuel sought." The old man's eyes opened, fixing on her with surprising clarity. "You have his spirit," he whispered. "Strong, like the river stone that does not yield to the current." Touched by his words, Abigail squeezed his hand gently before rising. At the door, she paused, looking back at Daniel. "Bar this behind me," she instructed, "and be ready when I return. If all goes well, we'll have help by nightfall." Daniel nodded, his dark eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Be safe," he said simply. With a final nod, Abigail stepped out into the cold morning light, pulling her scarf up to cover her distinctive red hair. As the door closed behind her, she heard the solid thunk of the wooden bar falling into place. She stood for a moment, getting her bearings, and scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of watchers. Seeing nothing suspicious, she set off toward the northeast, where a barely visible trail led through the dense pines toward Ferguson's isolated trading post. The journey would be challenging in the deep snow, but Abigail welcomed the physical exertion. It gave her mind something to focus on, besides the revelations of the past day, the confirmation of her family's murder, the conspiracy her father had uncovered, and the unexpected allies who had brought these truths to light. As she made her way through the silent forest, thoughts of Daniel kept returning unbidden. His quiet strength, his controlled anger, the gentle way he cared for his father despite his own pain. In just 2 days, he had become more than a stranger seeking shelter. He had become a partner in her search for justice, a connection to a world she had thought forever lost. What would happen when this was over, she wondered. If they succeeded in exposing Hunter, would Daniel and Silver Cloud simply move on? The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. After a decade of isolation, the prospect of returning to solitude seemed suddenly unbearable. Abigail pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the path ahead. One step at a time, one problem at a time. First, they needed to survive. Justice had to come before anything else. Justice for her family, for Daniel's parents, for all those who had suffered under Hunter's greed. The forest opened occasionally to reveal glimpses of the valley below, the snow-covered landscape stretching toward distant mountains. Somewhere out there, Hunter was planning his next move, perhaps gathering more men for tonight's confrontation. They would need every advantage, every ally they could find. As she continued toward Ferguson's trading post, Abigail felt a strange sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The witch of Callaway Cabin was no longer merely surviving, she was fighting back. And for the first time since the fire that had claimed her family, she was not fighting alone. The forest stood silent around Abigail as she made her way toward Ferguson's trading post. Each breath formed a small cloud in the frigid air, and the only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath her boots and the occasional crack of a branch heavy with ice. She moved carefully, staying within the tree line whenever possible, alert to any sign of Hunter's men. Ferguson's place lay in a small clearing beside a half-frozen creek. The trading post itself was a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney built by the old trapper decades earlier, when this part of Wyoming was still largely unexplored territory. As Abigail approached, she saw smoke rising from the chimney, a welcome sign that Ferguson was home. She paused at the edge of the trees, surveying the clearing for any indication of danger. Seeing nothing suspicious, she stepped into the open, making her way to the cabin's front door. Before she could knock, it swung open to reveal Jeremiah Ferguson himself, a shotgun held casually in his gnarled hands. "Thought I heard someone approaching," the old man said, his voice as rough as tree bark. He lowered the weapon when he recognized her. "Miss Callaway, been a while." "Mr. Ferguson," Abigail acknowledged with a nod. "May I come in?" Ferguson studied her for a moment, his rheumy eyes taking in her disheveled appearance and the rifle slung across her back. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "Some," Abigail admitted. "But not the kind that will follow me here, if that's your concern." The old trapper grunted, stepping aside to let her enter. "Trouble finds its own way," he muttered. "Don't need help from the likes of us." Inside the cabin was warm and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and dried herbs. Animal pelts hung from the rafters, and the walls were lined with shelves containing an eclectic mix of goods: canned foods, ammunition, tools, medicines, and various other supplies that the isolated residents of the valley might need between trips to town. Ferguson gestured to a chair beside the pot-bellied stove. "Sit," he commanded. "You look half-frozen." Abigail accepted gratefully, extending her hands toward the warmth. The old man busied himself pouring coffee from a battered pot that sat atop the stove. He handed her a tin cup without asking if she wanted it, then settled into a chair opposite her, his shotgun propped against the wall within easy reach. "Now," Ferguson said, fixing her with a penetrating stare, "what brings Samuel Callaway's daughter to my door in the dead of winter?" Abigail sipped the coffee, black and strong enough to stand a spoon in, before responding. "I need to get a message to someone in town," she said, discreetly. Ferguson's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Town folk and I don't generally mix," he reminded her. "That's why I'm out here and they're down there." "This is important," Abigail pressed. "Lives depend on it." The old trapper studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing her sincerity against his own desire to remain uninvolved. "Who's the message for?" he asked finally. "Deputy James Thornton," Abigail replied. "The new one." Ferguson's expression soured. "Lawman, you're asking me to play messenger to a badge." "He's not like the others," Abigail insisted. "His father was Thomas Thornton, a lawyer who worked with my father years ago." "Don't matter who his daddy was," Ferguson grumbled. "He wears the star, now takes orders from Hunter." Abigail leaned forward. "Mr. Ferguson, you've known me since I was a child. You know what happened to my family. What you may not know is that it wasn't an accident." The old man's eyes narrowed. "Speak, plain girl." "The fire that killed my parents and brother was deliberately set," Abigail stated, her voice steady despite the pain these words still caused. "By Roland Hunter and his associates. The same men who have been forcing people off their land for years. Ferguson's weathered face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Bold accusations," he said after a moment. "Hunter's a powerful man in these parts." "And that's exactly why I need to reach Deputy Thornton," Abigail explained. "I have evidence documents that prove what Hunter has been doing, but I need help to get the rest of the proof and to make sure it reaches the proper authorities." "And you think this young deputy will turn against his boss? Risk his neck for you?" Ferguson sounded skeptical. Abigail withdrew a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "I think he deserves the chance to choose," she said simply. "All I'm asking is that you get this note to him privately. What he does with it is his decision." Ferguson stared at the paper for a long moment before reluctantly extending his hand. "No promises," he muttered as he took it, "but I'm headed to town this afternoon anyway. Need supplies." He tucked the note inside his heavy coat. "If I see the boy alone, I'll pass it along. That's all I can offer." "That's all I ask?" Abigail replied, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you." The old trapper waved away her thanks. "Don't thank me yet. This could all come to nothing or worse." Abigail nodded grimly, knowing he was right. They were placing a dangerous bet on a man they barely knew, whose loyalties were untested. "There's something else you should know," Ferguson said suddenly, his voice lowering. "There have been strangers in the valley, men I don't recognize riding through at odd hours." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "3 came by yesterday, asked if I'd seen any Indians in the area. Said they were from the Territorial Marshal's office." Abigail's heart quickened. "Were they?" Ferguson snorted. "Marshals don't usually carry Sharp's buffalo guns or wear spurs like those fellows did. Hunters more like. Or hired guns." "Did you tell them anything?" Abigail asked, trying to keep the alarm from her voice. "Told him I hadn't seen any Indians since last summer when some Shoshone came through trading horses." The old man's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Didn't mention the 2 staying at your cabin." Abigail's shock must have shown on her face, for Ferguson chuckled dryly. "Not much happens in this valley I don't know about, girl. Been watching that cabin of yours for years. Figured if you wanted company, it wasn't my business to interfere." "Why didn't you say anything when I arrived?" Abigail demanded. Ferguson shrugged. "Wanted to see if you'd tell me yourself. Judge character that way." He took a long drink of his coffee. "You didn't, which tells me you're protecting them. Must have your reasons." Abigail hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Ferguson had always been a loner, deliberately separate from the politics and prejudices of Sugar Creek. But that didn't necessarily make him an ally. "The older one is ill," she said carefully. "They came seeking shelter in the storm. I couldn't turn them away." Ferguson nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. "Your father would have done the same," he said simply. "Samuel Calloway never judged a man by the color of his skin, only by his actions." He leaned forward, his voice dropping further. "But you should know those men who came asking, they weren't just passing through. They're looking for someone specific." "How do you know?" Abigail asked. They described him tall, scarred face, half-breed. Ferguson's eyes were serious now. "Said he was wanted for murder in Colorado Territory. Dangerous, they claimed." Abigail's blood ran cold. Hunter was laying groundwork to justify violence against Daniel. A supposed murderer would make an easy target, one the town would accept without question. "It's a lie," she said firmly. "Another of Hunter's fabrications." Ferguson raised his hands. "Not my place to judge," he said. "Just thought you should know what's coming your way. Those men didn't look like the type to ask questions before shooting." Abigail stood suddenly anxious to return to the cabin. "I should go. They'll be wondering where I am." The old trapper rose with her. "Take the back trail," he advised. "Saw tracks on the main path this morning. Someone watching, most likely." Abigail nodded gratefully. "And the message?" Ferguson patted his coat where he'd tucked her note. "I'll do what I can," he promised. "For Samuel's sake, if nothing else." Outside, the day had warmed slightly, the sun high overhead melting the surface of the snow into a treacherous crust that broke under each step. Abigail followed Ferguson's advice, taking a circuitous route back toward her cabin, staying alert for any sign of watchers. The journey back seemed longer, her mind heavy with the news Ferguson had shared. Hunter was escalating his efforts, bringing in hired guns, and spreading false stories about Daniel. The urgency of their situation had increased dramatically. When the cabin finally came into view, Abigail approached with caution, circling to the eastern side as they had done earlier that morning. She knocked on the back door with the agreed-upon pattern, 3 quick taps, 2 slow. Daniel's voice came immediately from within. "Abigail, yes," she confirmed. "It's me. Alone." The bar scraped back, and the door swung open to reveal Daniel, relief evident in his face. He stepped aside to let her enter quickly, securing the door behind her. "You're later than expected," he said, concern underlying his words. "I took a roundabout path back," Abigail explained, shrugging off her coat. "How's Silver Cloud?" Daniel glanced toward the fireplace, where his father still sat, wrapped in blankets. "No worse," he said. "The medicine seems to be helping, but he needs proper care." Abigail moved to check on the old man, pressing a hand gently to his forehead. His skin felt hot, feverish, but his breathing seemed less labored than before. "Did you deliver your message?" Daniel asked. Abigail nodded. "Ferguson will try to get it to Thornton this afternoon, but there's more." She lowered her voice, gesturing for Daniel to join her at the table away from Silver Cloud. "Hunter has brought in hired guns men posing as marshals. They're asking about you specifically." Daniel's face hardened. "What are they saying?" "That you're wanted for murder in Colorado." Abigail watched his reaction carefully. "It's not true, is it?" "No," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I've never been to Colorado. It's a fabrication meant to justify whatever they plan to do to us." Abigail nodded, relieved, despite herself. "That's what I thought. But it means Hunter is preparing for more than just intimidation. He's setting the stage for violence that the town will accept." "Then we need to act quickly," Daniel concluded. "Tonight as planned, with or without this deputy's help." They spent the next hours preparing, gathering what they would need for the journey to town and the infiltration of the courthouse. Abigail found the key to the service entrance in her father's desk, along with a small revolver that she loaded and tucked into her boot. As the afternoon waned, bringing early dusk to the valley, they finalized their plans. If Deputy Thornton responded to the message, they would meet him at a designated spot on the Eastern Trail. If not, they would proceed alone, using the cover of darkness to enter Sugar Creek unseen. "We should leave as soon as it's fully dark," Abigail said, checking the sky through the window. "That gives us about an hour to prepare." Daniel nodded, his expression troubled. "And my father?" They both looked at Silver Cloud's condition had deteriorated since their return from town. His breathing was more labored, his skin taking on a grayish tinge beneath its natural copper, and the coughing fits had grown less frequent, but more concerning, each one seeming to drain what little strength remained in his frail frame. He was clearly too weak to travel, especially on a difficult trail through snow, yet leaving him alone with Hunter's men watching was equally dangerous. "We can't take him with us," Abigail said gently. "The journey would kill him." "And I won't leave him unprotected," Daniel insisted. They had reached an impasse they'd been avoiding for hours. Abigail chewed her lip, considering options. Finally, she spoke. "What if we create a hidden shelter somewhere not in the cabin, but nearby the root cellar, perhaps? It's small, but warm, and few people know it exists." Daniel looked skeptical. "How would that be safer than the cabin?" "If Hunter returns with his men, they'll search the cabin first," Abigail explained. "The cellar entrance is hidden beneath an old woodpile behind the barn. Unless they know to look for it, they might miss it entirely." "And if they find it?" Daniel pressed. Abigail had no answer for that. They both knew the risks they faced, the limited options available to them. Silver Cloud stirred his eyes, opening to fix on them with surprising clarity. "Go," he said, his voice weak but determined. "Both of you. I will be safe." "Father, no," Daniel protested. "I won't leave you alone." The old man raised a trembling hand. "The path to justice requires sacrifice," he said. "I have seen this in my dreams. You must go together, or all is lost." Daniel knelt beside his father's chair, taking the frail hand in his own. "I promised to protect you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And you have," Silver Cloud assured him. "But now you must protect her and the truth she carries." His dark eyes moved to Abigail. "The daughter of Samuel must complete what her father began. You must help her, my son." The old man's certainty was compelling, his conviction powerful despite his physical weakness. Abigail saw Daniel struggling with the decision, torn between his duty to his father and the larger mission they had undertaken. "We'll prepare the root cellar," she said, making the choice for him. "Make it as comfortable as possible. If all goes well, we'll be back before dawn." Daniel held his father's gaze for a long moment, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded. "As you wish, Father," he said quietly. "But we will return." And they worked quickly. Abigail gathering blankets and supplies, while Daniel cleared the entrance to the root cellar. The small underground space dug into the earth behind the barn had once stored vegetables through the harsh Wyoming winters. Its dirt walls retained heat well, and the single air vent provided adequate ventilation without allowing in too much cold. By the time they had finished their preparations, full darkness had fallen over the valley. They helped Silver Cloud into the shelter, making him as comfortable as possible on a pallet of blankets. Daniel placed a loaded rifle within the old man's reach, though they both knew he was likely too weak to use it effectively. "Conserve your strength," Daniel told his father. "We'll be back as soon as possible." Silver Cloud grasped his son's hand. "Remember what I taught you," he said softly. "Strength is not in violence, but in knowing when to stand firm." Daniel nodded, his expression solemn. "I remember." Abigail knelt beside the old man. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me understand my father's final work, for bringing the truth to light." Silver Cloud smiled faintly. "Brothers in life," he murmured. "Brothers still in purpose. Samuel would be proud of you, daughter." The words touched her deeply. Blinking back unexpected tears, Abigail squeezed Silver Cloud's hand gently before rising. They covered the entrance, carefully arranging the woodpile to conceal it while still allowing air to circulate. With final preparations complete, Abigail and Daniel set out toward Sugar Creek, taking the eastern trail as planned. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, alert to any sound that might indicate pursuit. The night was clear, stars glittering coldly overhead, the moon casting blue-white light across the snow. They reached the meeting point, a lightning-struck pine that stood alone on a small rise an hour into their journey. Abigail scanned the area for any sign of Deputy Thornton, but the landscape remained empty and still. "He's not coming," Daniel concluded after they had waited several minutes. "We should continue." Abigail nodded, though disappointment weighed heavily on her. She had hoped for an ally within the town, someone who might help them navigate the courthouse safely. Now they would have to rely entirely on themselves. They had just started down the path again when a figure emerged from the trees ahead, a rifle held ready but not aimed directly at them. Abigail and Daniel froze, hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. "Miss Calloway," a voice called softly. "Is that you?" Abigail recognized the voice immediately. "Deputy Thornton." The figure moved closer, moonlight revealing the young deputy's features. He approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "I got your note," he said, stopping several paces away. "About my father and Judge Calloway working together on the Blackwater case. How did you know about that?" "My father's journal," Abigail replied. "He mentioned your father often, always, with respect." She studied Thornton's face. "Thank you for coming. It couldn't have been an easy decision." Thornton shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving between Abigail and Daniel. "Your note said you had information about Mayor Hunter," he said. "Something I needed to know." "We have evidence that Hunter and his associates have been forcing people off their land," Abigail explained. "Both settlers and native families. Evidence that they've committed fraud, intimidation, even murder to acquire properties along the planned railroad route." The deputy's eyes widened. "Those are serious accusations." "Not accusations," Daniel interjected. "Facts. We have documents proving the land transfers were falsified, and there's more evidence in the courthouse if we can access it." "On the courthouse?" Thornton looked alarmed. "What are you planning?" Abigail decided on complete honesty. "My father hid documents in a secure cabinet there just before he died. We have the key, but we need to get inside undetected." Thornton ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled. "This is a lot to take in. Hunter is my boss. He's a respected figure in town." "Is he?" Abigail challenged. "Or is he feared?" "There's a difference." The young deputy was silent for a moment, considering. "There have been things," he admitted finally, "things that didn't sit right. The way certain matters are handled, people who are pressured to sell property complaints that mysteriously disappear from our records." "Hunter killed my family," Daniel said bluntly. 20 years ago, he led a group of men who burned our homestead. They killed my parents and tried to kill me." His hand rose to the scar on his face. "I've been hunting him ever since, not for revenge, but for justice." "And he killed my family too," Abigail added. "The fire that took my parents and brother wasn't an accident. It was Hunter silencing my father before he could expose the land fraud scheme." Thornton looked between them, his expression troubled. "These are hard claims to believe, without proof," he said slowly. "Hunter has been mayor for over a decade. He's built this town." "On stolen land and blood money," Daniel replied. "We can prove it," Abigail assured him. "That's why we need to reach the courthouse. My father left evidence there, protected, until someone could bring it to light." Thornton was quiet again, weighing his options. Finally, he straightened his shoulders, decision made. "I can get you into the courthouse," he said. "There's a night watchman, but he's on my rounds. I can distract him." Relief washed through Abigail. "Thank you," she breathed. "You're doing the right thing." "I hope so," Thornton replied grimly. "Because if you're wrong about this, we're all risking our necks for nothing." "We're not wrong," Daniel assured him. "And once you see the evidence yourself, you'll understand why this matters so much." They continued toward Sugar Creek Thornton, leading them on a path that avoided the main road and any houses on the outskirts of town. He explained in hushed tones that Hunter had indeed brought in additional men, posting them strategically throughout the small community. He claims they're deputies from neighboring counties, helping with a manhunt, Thornton said. But they don't act like lawmen, more like hired guns. That's exactly what they are, Daniel confirmed. Hunter is preparing for violence. They reached the edge of town just before midnight. Sugar Creek lay quiet, most windows dark, though light still spilled from the saloon down the street. Thornton led them along back alleys, avoiding the few people still abroad at this hour. The courthouse stood in the center of town, a two-story brick building with white columns flanking the entrance. A single light burned in a ground-floor window, the watchman's post, Thornton explained. "Wait here," he instructed, leaving them concealed behind a nearby storage shed. "I'll draw him out. Create a distraction. When you see us leave the building, make your move. The service entrance is on the north side, as you said." Abigail nodded. "How long can you keep him occupied?" 10 minutes, maybe 15, Thornton estimated. "Not long enough for a thorough search, but hopefully enough for you to find what you need." "It'll have to be," Abigail said determinedly. Thornton hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. "This opens the main records room," he said, pressing it into Abigail's palm. "Most of the important documents are kept there." "Thank you," Abigail whispered, genuinely moved by his trust. The deputy nodded once, then stepped out into the street, approaching the courthouse openly. They watched as he entered through the front door, disappearing inside. "Can we trust him?" Daniel asked quietly. "I think so," Abigail replied, "but we don't have much choice at this point." They waited tense and alert for what seemed an eternity. Finally, the front door opened again, and Thornton emerged with an older man, the night watchman. They conversed briefly, then walked down the street toward the sheriff's office, their voices carrying indistinctly on the night air. "Now," Abigail urged, and they moved swiftly across the open space to the north side of the building. The service entrance was just as Abigail remembered, a plain door partially concealed by shadow. She withdrew the key from her pocket, praying it would still work after all these years. The lock turned with a satisfying click, and the door swung inward on surprisingly well-oiled hinges. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow corridor that had once led to the old jail cells. Abigail led the way, moving with confidence born of childhood familiarity. The courthouse had been her father's domain, a place she had visited often as a girl. The main records room was located on the ground floor, not far from the service entrance. Thornton's key worked smoothly in this lock, as well, admitting them to a large room lined with shelves and filing cabinets. "Where would the secure cabinet be?" Daniel asked, glancing around at the overwhelming amount of documentation. "This way," Abigail replied, moving purposefully toward the back of the room. "My father showed me once when I asked where important papers were kept." The cabinet in question stood apart from the others, its heavy oak construction and substantial lock indicating its special purpose. Abigail withdrew the key they had found in the tin box at the thinking stone, holding it up in the dim light that filtered through the windows. "This is it," she whispered. "The moment of truth." The key slid into the lock, and Abigail held her breath as she turned it. Would it still work after a decade? Had the lock been changed? But her doubts proved unfounded as the mechanism clicked open, allowing the cabinet door to swing wide. Inside, the shelves were filled with neatly labeled folders and document cases. Abigail scanned them quickly, looking for anything that might have been her father's. "There," Daniel said suddenly, pointing to a small strongbox on the bottom shelf. "S.C. Samuel Calloway." Abigail knelt to examine it. The box bore her father's initials, just as Daniel had noticed. It was locked, but the key they had used for the cabinet fit this lock as well. Inside lay a leather portfolio tied with cord and sealed with wax bearing her father's signet ring impression. Abigail's hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out. "This is it," she breathed. "My father's final evidence." Daniel glanced toward the door. "We should hurry," he urged. "Thornton can't keep the watchman away forever." Abigail nodded, tucking the portfolio inside her coat. They locked the cabinet again, leaving everything as they had found it, and made their way back to the service entrance. Thus far, their mission had gone remarkably smoothly. Perhaps too smoothly, Abigail thought, with a twinge of unease. Her fears proved justified as they stepped outside. A figure stood waiting in the shadows, a rifle aimed directly at them. "That's far enough," said a familiar voice, Roland Hunter. Abigail's blood ran cold. Beside her, Daniel tensed, ready to spring, despite the weapon trained on them. "How predictable you both are," Hunter continued, his scarred face twisted in a mockery of a smile. "I knew you'd come for those documents eventually. Just needed to be patient." "Where's Thornton?" Abigail demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your would-be ally," Hunter chuckled. "Currently explaining to my men why he was helping fugitives. I don't imagine his career in law enforcement will survive the night." He gestured with the rifle. "Now hand over what you took from the courthouse, Miss Calloway." Abigail's hand moved protectively to her coat, where the portfolio lay hidden. "These documents prove you murdered my family," she said, "and Daniel's parents. They prove you've been stealing land for years." "They prove nothing without someone to present them to the authorities," Hunter countered. "And you won't be doing that." He took a step closer. "The portfolio, Miss Calloway. Now." Daniel moved slightly, positioning himself between Abigail and Hunter's rifle. "You'll have to kill us both," he said quietly. "A pleasure I've waited 20 years for," Hunter replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Hunter prepared to fire a shot, rang out from somewhere behind them. Hunter staggered his rifle, discharging harmlessly into the ground as he fell to his knees. Deputy Thornton stepped from the shadows, his own weapon still raised. "Drop the rifle, Mayor," he ordered, his young voice firm with newfound authority. Hunter looked up, blood spreading across his shoulder where Thornton's bullet had struck. His expression was one of utter disbelief. "You fool," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "My job," Thornton replied simply. "Upholding the law, not your version of it." More figures appeared in the street, townsfolk, awakened by the gunshot, emerging cautiously from their homes. Among them, Abigail recognized Beatrice Thompson and Walter Dawson, their faces shocked as they took in the scene. "These people are criminals," Hunter shouted, attempting to rally support. "They've broken into the courthouse, stolen documents. This half-breed is wanted for murder in Colorado." Thornton stepped forward, his badge catching the moonlight. "That's a lie, Mayor, and you know it. I've telegraphed Colorado myself. There's no warrant for Daniel Redpath." He turned to address the growing crowd. "What we do have is evidence that Mayor Hunter and his associates have been forcing people off their land illegally for years. Evidence that he was responsible for the deaths of Judge Samuel Calloway and his family." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Abigail felt the weight of their stares, but for once they held curiosity rather than condemnation. "Preposterous," Hunter spat, clutching his wounded shoulder. "These are fabrications, lies spread by a woman the whole town knows is unstable. A witch who—" "Enough," came a new voice, deep and authoritative. The crowd parted to admit another figure, an elderly man leaning heavily on a cane, his silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. Abigail gasped in recognition. "Judge Wilson," she breathed. The territorial judge, her father's colleague and friend, a man she hadn't seen since her family's funeral. Wilson approached slowly, his aged face severe as he surveyed the scene. "I received a most unusual telegram yesterday," he announced, "from Deputy Thornton here asking me to review certain claims about land transactions in this county." He fixed Hunter with a cold stare. "I arrived this evening to find a town crawling with armed men who are most definitely not lawmen. Would you care to explain that Mayor Hunter—" Hunter's face had drained of color. "This is a local matter, Your Honor," he managed. "A misunderstanding that—" "I believe I'll be the judge of that," Wilson interrupted dryly. He turned to Abigail. "Miss Calloway, I understand you have documents that belong to your father." Abigail nodded, withdrawing the portfolio from her coat. "Yes, Your Honor. Evidence he collected before his death, proving Mayor Hunter's involvement in land fraud and murder." Wilson accepted the portfolio gravely. "These will need to be examined carefully, of course. But given the circumstances—" He gestured toward Hunter and the rifle on the ground. "I believe some immediate action is warranted." He turned to Thornton. "Deputy, place Mayor Hunter under arrest for assault and attempted murder at minimum. We'll add further charges as the evidence dictates." Thornton nodded, moving to secure Hunter, who seemed to have collapsed in on himself, the fight gone from his body. As Thornton led Hunter away, Wilson opened the portfolio quickly, scanning the first few documents. His eyes widened slightly at the letter signed simply C. "Charles Blackwood," he murmured. "You know who C is?" Abigail asked, surprised. The judge nodded grimly. Charles Blackwood was Hunter's business partner for nearly 20 years. A respected businessman, at least on the surface. He tapped the letter. 6 months after your father's death, Blackwood was found dead in his office. Apparent suicide, though there were questions. "Another loose end tied up," Daniel said quietly. As the deputy led the former mayor away, Judge Wilson addressed the gathered townsfolk. "There will be a full investigation into the matters raised here tonight. I suggest you all return to your homes. There will be time for questions and answers in the days to come." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly buzzing with the night's extraordinary events. Beatrice Thompson lingered longest, her eyes fixed on Abigail with an unreadable expression before she too turned away. When they were relatively alone, Judge Wilson approached Abigail and Daniel. "Samuel's daughter," he said softly, something like regret in his voice. "I should have looked closer when he died, should have questioned the circumstances." "You're here now," Abigail replied. "That's what matters." Wilson nodded, then turned his attention to Daniel. "And you must be Silver Cloud's son. The judge mentioned him in his correspondence, though not you specifically." "Adopted son," Daniel corrected, his voice softening with respect when speaking of the old man. "When Hunter and his men killed my parents, Silver Cloud found me half dead in the snow. He took me in when I had nothing, and no one gave me not just life, but a reason to live." Something in his tone conveyed the profound depth of this relationship without needing further words. The old judge's eyes softened with understanding. "Then you both have much invested in seeing justice done." He patted the portfolio. "I'll examine these thoroughly, but first—" He looked around. "Where is Silver Cloud now? I should like to meet the man Samuel called brother." Daniel exchanged a glance with Abigail, sudden concern crossing his features. "He's at the cabin," he said. "Ill and alone. We need to return immediately." "I'll arrange an escort," Wilson offered. "Hunter's men are still out there, though they'll scatter quickly once word reaches them of his arrest." "Thank you, Your Honor," Abigail said sincerely. "But we know the back trails. We'll move faster on our own." Wilson studied them both, then nodded. "Very well, but I expect to see you both in my court tomorrow morning. There is much to discuss." They agreed, then took their leave, hurrying back through the quiet streets of Sugar Creek toward the Eastern Trail. As they passed the sheriff's office, they saw Thornton overseeing Hunter's confinement in a cell. The deputy caught their eye, offering a brief nod that conveyed both acknowledgement and farewell. Once beyond the town limits, they moved swiftly through the night, retracing their path back toward the cabin. The journey seemed shorter somehow, buoyed as they were by the night's success and the urgency to check on Silver Cloud. "Do you think he's safe?" Abigail asked, as they crested a hill overlooking the valley. "I hope so," Daniel replied, his pace quickening. "But Hunter had men watching the cabin. If they saw us leave—" The thought spurred them to greater speed. They reached the valley floor and hurried along the frozen creek, following its curve toward the cabin. All seemed peaceful as they approached, no tracks in the snow, no sign of disturbance. They checked the cabin first, finding it empty and undisturbed. Then they moved to the root cellar, clearing away the concealing woodpile with anxious haste. Daniel pulled open the door, a lantern held high to illuminate the small space. Silver Cloud lay where they had left him, his eyes closed, his chest barely moving with shallow breaths. "Father," Daniel called softly, kneeling beside the old man. Silver Cloud's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort on his son's face. "You have returned," he murmured. "Both of you, as I knew you would." "We found the documents," Abigail told him, crouching on his other side. "And Judge Wilson has come. Hunter is arrested." A faint smile touched Silver Cloud's lips. "The circle closes," he whispered. "Justice finds its way like water flowing downhill." Daniel took his father's hand, alarmed by how cold it felt. "We need to get you inside to warmth," he urged. Silver Cloud shook his head slightly. "No need," he said, his voice growing weaker. "My journey ends here, my son. I have seen what I needed to see." "Don't speak that way," Daniel protested. "You'll recover. We'll get you proper care now that Hunter can't interfere." The old man's smile deepened, his eyes holding a profound peace. "I have lived my years," he said, "seen my son become a man of honor, helped complete my brother Samuel's final work." His gaze moved to Abigail. "The daughter of Samuel has found her strength again. This is good." Abigail felt tears rising, unexpected and unstoppable. "Thank you," she whispered, taking Silver Cloud's other hand, "for bringing the truth to light, for helping me understand my father's death." "Truth is like the sun," Silver Cloud replied, his voice now barely audible. "It may hide behind clouds, but always returns to shine on the land." He turned back to Daniel. "Remember what I taught you, my son. Hatred consumes the vessel that carries it. Choose a different path." Daniel nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I will, Father, I promise." Silver Cloud seemed satisfied with this. He closed his eyes, his breathing growing more labored. "I go to join my ancestors," he murmured. "And your father, daughter of Samuel, I will tell him of your courage." The old man's chest rose once more, then stilled. A profound silence fell over the root cellar, broken only by the soft sound of Daniel's grief as he bowed his head over his father's hand. Abigail sat motionless, her own tears falling freely now. In the short time she had known Silver Cloud, she had come to respect his wisdom, his dignity, his unwavering commitment to justice. His passing left a hollow space, a sense of loss that echoed her grief for her own family. After a time, she couldn't have said how long Daniel looked up, his face composed once more, though grief still shadowed his eyes. "He knew," he said softly. "He knew he wouldn't leave this valley alive. That's why he insisted we both go to town," Abigail realized. "He saw this ending." Daniel nodded. "His dreams," he explained. "Sometimes they showed him paths that others couldn't see. Sweet." He looked down at his father's peaceful face. He would want to be buried in the traditional way, facing the rising sun. "We'll do it properly," Abigail promised. At dawn. They carried Silver Cloud's body to the cabin, laying him with dignity on Abigail's bed. Daniel performed the rituals of his people, singing softly in his native tongue, washing his father's body with herbs steeped in warm water. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn, they prepared a grave on the ridge near the thinking stone, a place with a view of the valley where the first rays of sunlight would touch each morning. The ground was frozen, making digging difficult, but they persevered, working in companionable silence. When all was ready, they wrapped Silver Cloud in a blanket, adorned with the beadwork he had carried with him, and laid him to rest, facing the east. Daniel sang once more, his deep voice rising and falling in a melody that seemed to Abigail both sorrowful and triumphant, a celebration of a life well lived and a soul returning to its source. As the sun cleared the horizon, casting golden light across the newly turned earth, Daniel placed his hand on the grave. "Journey well, father," he said simply. "I will make you proud." They stood together as the morning brightened around them, the beauty of the snow-covered landscape a fitting tribute to the man they had laid to rest. Without consciously deciding to do so, Abigail found her hand reaching for Daniel's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, offering comfort and receiving it in equal measure. "What will you do now?" Abigail asked, after a time voicing the question that had been in her mind since the confrontation with Hunter. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "I've spent 20 years searching for justice," he said finally. "Now that it's found, I'm not sure what comes next." "You could stay," Abigail suggested, her heart beating faster at her own boldness. "This valley has room for more than one solitary soul." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "You would want that, after all the trouble I've brought to your door." "You brought truth," Abigail corrected. "And purpose. And—" she hesitated, finding the words difficult. "And end to loneliness." Daniel's expression softened, something like hope kindling in his eyes. "I've been alone a long time too," he admitted, moving from place to place, never belonging anywhere. "Silver Cloud was my only constant." "Then perhaps it's time we both found a new constant," Abigail suggested quietly. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "Perhaps it is," he agreed. They remained on the ridge as the sun rose fully, casting long shadows behind them. Below the cabin stood, as it always had, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin column against the blue sky. But it was different now, Abigail realized. No longer a place of isolation and grief, but a place of possibility. Whatever came next, the investigation into Hunter's crimes, the justice that would finally be served, the rebuilding of trust with the town, they would face it together. Two people who had survived loss and loneliness, who had found in each other an unexpected kinship. As they made their way back down the ridge, Abigail felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a decade. The witch of Callaway Cabin was gone, that identity shed like an outgrown skin. In her place stood simply Abigail Rose Callaway, daughter of Samuel, a woman who had reclaimed her father's legacy and found her own strength in the process. Daniel walked beside her, his step matching hers, his presence solid and reassuring. The path ahead was uncharted, but for the first time in years, Abigail faced the unknown without fear. Sometimes, she reflected, love grows not in grand declarations or dramatic moments, but in the quiet spaces between two souls who have weathered similar storms. It emerges slowly, like the first green shoots after winter's thaw, tentative but persistent. And once rooted, it stands firm against whatever winds may come. As they reached the cabin door, Daniel paused, looking back at the ridge where his father now rested. "He would be pleased," he said softly. "About us, I mean." "My father too, I think," Abigail replied with a small smile. Daniel nodded, his own smile echoing hers. "Then we honor them both by moving forward." He held the door for her, and together they stepped into the warmth of the cabin, no longer separate individuals bound by circumstance, but two people choosing to walk a shared path, whatever it might hold. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the surface of the snow into countless diamonds that caught the light. Spring would come, eventually bringing new growth to the valley. And when it did, it would find two hearts that had once been frozen, now thawed and beating in unison, a fire kindled in the midst of winter's snow. Spring did come to the valley earlier than usual that year. With the melting snow came change to Sugar Creek as well. Judge Wilson's investigation had revealed the full extent of Hunter's crimes, implicating several prominent citizens and exonerating others who had been silenced. The town was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about its past and its treatment of those deemed outsiders. On a mild April day, Abigail rode into town for supplies. She no longer covered her distinctive red hair or kept her eyes downcast. The whispers still followed, but they were different now, curious rather than condemning. At the general store, Beatrice Thompson stood arranging goods on a shelf. She stiffened as Abigail entered, but did not flee as she once might have. When Abigail approached the counter, the older woman cleared her throat awkwardly. "Miss Calloway," she said, voice strained but determined. That is to say, the Ladies' Aid Society is planning a spring social next week. We wondered if you might attend." Abigail studied the woman's face, not quite apologetic, but no longer hostile. It wasn't forgiveness Beatrice offered, but perhaps a beginning. "Thank you," Abigail replied evenly. "Daniel and I will consider it." Something like surprise flickered across Beatrice's face at the casual mention of Daniel, at the implication that the relationship between Abigail and the half-Cheyenne man was now openly acknowledged. "Yes, well," Beatrice murmured, "both of you would be welcome." The words clearly cost her, but they were sincere enough. As Abigail left the store, Deputy Thornton tipped his hat to her from across the street. Several others nodded in greeting. Not friendship, not yet, but recognition. A place in the community she had been denied for a decade. The witch of Calloway Cabin was gone indeed. In her place stood a woman who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. A woman who had found love where she least expected it. A woman who carried her father's legacy of justice with pride. And waiting for her at the cabin, no longer a solitary refuge but a home, was Daniel, his quiet strength. A constant reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that sometimes the most unexpected paths led to the most perfect destinations.